The barn door exploded inward as Caleb Mercer's boot connected with the rotting wood, splinters flying like shrapnel through the Montana dusk. Inside, Lydia Harrow's screams pierced the air while Silas Gentry raised a broken whiskey bottle, its jagged edge catching the dying light. "She's free now!" Caleb roared, his Colt .45 already clearing leather. This is the story of how one cowboy's split-second decision changed everything in Silver Creek, Montana. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this tale has traveled. The September wind carried the scent of sage and impending rain across the Montana prairie as Caleb Mercer guided his Palomino mare along the eastern boundary of his ranch. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the grasslands in shades of amber and rust, while storm clouds gathered like dark omens in the northern sky. He'd been riding fence since dawn, checking for breaks where his cattle might wander onto Silas Gentry's land that until 3 months ago had belonged to the Harrow family. Caleb pulled his weathered Stetson lower against the wind, his gray eyes scanning the familiar landscape that had been his home for the past 7 years. At 32, he'd built his modest ranch from nothing but determination and calloused hands, every fence post a testament to his solitary dedication. The Rolling M Ranch wasn't much compared to the sprawling empires that dominated Montana territory, but it was his, earned through honest work rather than the ruthless tactics that men like Gentry employed. The crack of a gunshot shattered his contemplation, echoing across the valley like thunder before the storm. Caleb's mare, Dusty, threw her head up, ears pricked forward toward the Harrow place, or what folks had started calling the Gentry spread since old Thomas Harrow's suspicious death 3 months back. Then came the scream, high, desperate, unmistakably female, cutting through the evening air like a blade through silk. "Lydia," Caleb breathed, his blood turning to ice water in his veins. Without conscious thought, he dug his spurs into Dusty's flanks, and the mare leaped forward into a gallop that ate up the quarter-mile between his fence line and the Harrow barn. The old barn loomed before him, its weathered boards gone gray as bones in the fading light. The main door was barred from the outside. A thick timber beam dropped into iron brackets that hadn't been there when Thomas Harrow was alive. Another scream erupted from within, followed by the crash of something heavy hitting wood. Caleb didn't slow down. He pulled his boots from the stirrups and launched himself from Dusty's back while she was still at full gallop, his shoulder slamming into the barn door with the force of a battering ram. The timber beam cracked, but held. Pain shot through his shoulder, but adrenaline drowned it out as he grabbed the beam with both hands and wrenched it upward, muscles straining against its weight. The beam clattered to the ground, and Caleb kicked the door open, his hand already reaching for the Colt .45 on his hip. "She's free now!" he roared into the shadows, not knowing exactly what he'd find, but ready to face it head on. The scene that greeted him froze his blood. Lydia Harrow was backed into the corner near the old grain bins, her dove-gray dress torn at the shoulder, revealing angry red marks on her pale skin. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eyebrow, and her usually perfectly coiffed auburn hair hung in wild disarray around her face. Her green eyes, wide with terror, locked onto Caleb for a brief moment before darting back to the figure advancing on her. Silas Gentry swayed on his feet, a broken whiskey bottle clutched in his meaty fist, its jagged edges gleaming wickedly. His expensive black suit was disheveled, his string tie askew, and the stench of bourbon rolled off him in waves. At 53, Gentry was a bull of a man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with hands that had broken more than just horses in his rise to power. "Well, well," Gentry slurred, turning his bloodshot eyes toward Caleb. "If it ain't the high and mighty Mercer, come to play hero. This ain't your concern, cowboy. This here's between me and my property." "She's not your property, Gentry," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous as he stepped fully into the barn, his hand resting on his pistol grip. "Miss Harrow is a free woman, and you've got no right to lay hands on her." Gentry laughed, an ugly sound that echoed in the rafters where disturbed swallows chittered nervously. "Free? Her daddy owed me more than this whole ranch was worth. Now that he's gone to his reward, everything he had belongs to me, including his pretty little daughter." "That's a lie." Lydia's voice cracked but held firm despite her fear. "My father never borrowed a cent from you. Those papers you showed the sheriff were forgeries, and you know it." Shut your mouth, woman. Gentry lunged toward her with surprising speed for a drunk man, the broken bottle raised high. Caleb moved faster. His Colt cleared leather and fired in one smooth motion, the bullet catching the bottle and sending it exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. Gentry howled, clutching his hand where fragments of glass had embedded themselves in his palm. Next one goes in your gut, Caleb warned, keeping his gun trained on Gentry's substantial midsection. Step away from the lady. Now. For a moment, Gentry's face contorted with rage, and Caleb thought the man might actually charge him. Then, slowly, calculatingly, the land grabber's expression shifted to something more dangerous, cold sobriety cutting through the alcohol haze. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Mercer, Gentry said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than a shout. You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing, a two-bit rancher on a patch of dirt I'll own before the snow flies. And when I'm done with you, there won't be enough left to bury. Big talk from a man who beats women, Caleb replied, though he kept his voice steady despite the chill that ran down his spine. Gentry had the sheriff in his pocket and enough hired guns to make good on his threats. Miss Harrow, can you ride? Lydia pushed herself away from the wall, her legs shaking but holding. Yes, she said, her chin lifting with a flash of the pride that had made her the belle of Silver Creek before her father's death. Then get on my horse. She's right outside. Lydia started to move, but Gentry shifted to block her path. She ain't going nowhere. You might have that gun on me now, cowboy, but my men are going to be here any minute. You can't watch all directions at once. As if summoned by his words, voices carried on the wind from the direction of the main house. Caleb recognized the rough tones of Jake Thornton and Bull Mackenzie, two of Gentry's most notorious hired guns. His mind raced, calculating odds and options. In a straight fight, he might take one, maybe two, but not Gentry and his whole crew. Miss Harrow, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off Gentry. When I say run, you run. Don't look back. Don't stop. Get on Dusty and ride hard for my place. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will take care of you. I won't leave you here to see. You will, Caleb interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Because if you don't, we both die here, and then who's going to make sure justice gets done for your father? The voices were getting closer. Caleb could hear spurs jingling, the creak of leather. 3 men, maybe 4. His finger tightened on the trigger. Gentry, he said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. You know what the problem is with hiring killers? They're only loyal to money, and dead men don't pay wages. Gentry's eyes narrowed, trying to puzzle out Caleb's meaning, when Caleb suddenly pivoted and fired 3 shots through the barn's side wall, not at anyone, but close enough to the approaching voices to send them diving for cover. In the same motion, he grabbed an oil lantern from its hook and hurled it against the far wall, where it shattered and spread flames across the old hay. Run! He shouted to Lydia, who didn't need to be told twice. She bolted for the door as smoke began to fill the barn. Gentry roared and started after her, but Caleb was there, his fist connecting with the bigger man's jaw in a blow that would have felled a lesser man. Gentry staggered, but didn't go down, his own massive fist catching Caleb in the ribs and driving the air from his lungs. They grappled in the thickening smoke, Gentry's superior weight bearing Caleb back toward the spreading flames. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Caleb could hear his horse whinnying outside, hear Lydia's voice calling urgently to the mare. With a desperate surge of strength, Caleb drove his knee into Gentry's stomach, doubling the man over. He didn't wait to see if Gentry would recover. The smoke was too thick, the flames too close. Caleb stumbled toward the door, his lungs burning, just as the first of Gentry's men rounded the corner with rifles raised. The gunfire was deafening. Bullets splintered the doorframe inches from Caleb's head as he dove through, rolling in the dirt and coming up running. Lydia had managed to mount Dusty, her torn dress hiked up to allow her to sit astride, a scandalous sight in normal circumstances. But these were far from normal. Move! Caleb shouted, vaulting up behind her and grabbing the reins. Dusty, true to her training, wheeled around and broke into a gallop as more bullets whined past them. Caleb hunched over Lydia, shielding her with his body as they raced into the gathering darkness. Behind them, the barn was fully ablaze now, flames reaching toward the storm clouds like angry fingers. Caleb could hear Gentry's voice roaring commands. hear the thunder of hooves as his men scrambled for their horses. But Dusty was grain-fed and well-rested, and she ran like the wind itself, carrying them across the creek that marked the boundary between Gentry's stolen land and Caleb's ranch. They didn't slow until they reached the main gate of the Rolling M, where Caleb finally allowed Dusty to drop to a canter, her sides heaving with exertion. The ranch house came into view, a modest two-story structure of logs and stone that Caleb had built with his own hands, smoke rising peacefully from the chimney as if the violence of the last few minutes had happened in another world. Mrs. Chen appeared on the porch before they'd even reached the house, her lined face creased with concern. The elderly Chinese woman had been with Caleb for 5 years, ever since he'd found her near death on the road after her family's laundry in town had been burned by men who didn't want her kind in Silver Creek. She took one look at Lydia's condition and began barking orders in a mixture of Mandarin and English. "Bring her inside, Mr. Caleb. Quick, quick. I prepare hot water and bandages." Caleb dismounted first, then carefully helped Lydia down. She swayed on her feet, and he caught her before she could fall, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She didn't protest, her head falling against his shoulder as exhaustion and shock finally began to overtake the adrenaline. "You're safe now," he murmured as he carried her up the porch steps. "I won't let him hurt you again." Lydia's green eyes found his, and for a moment something passed between them. Not quite gratitude, not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of both. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you risk your life for me? You barely know me." Caleb paused at the threshold, considering his answer. The truth was, he'd been watching Lydia Harrow from afar for years, admiring her spirit and grace, the way she held her head high even after her mother's death, the way she cared for her aging father. But she'd been beyond his reach. A lady of quality, educated back east, while he was just a cowboy who'd made good. Her father's death and Gentry's predations had changed everything, brought her into his orbit in the worst possible way. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply, carrying her inside. "And because I knew your father. He was a good man who didn't deserve what Gentry did to him. Neither do you." Mrs. Chen had already prepared the guest room, the bed turned down and hot water steaming in a basin. She shooed Caleb out with gentle but firm hands, muttering about propriety and men not knowing their place. But before he left, Lydia caught his hand. "Mr. Mercer, Caleb," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Gentry won't let this stand. He'll come for you, for both of us." "Let him come," Caleb replied, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "I've faced worse than Silas Gentry and lived to tell about it. You just rest now. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." He left her in Mrs. Chen's capable hands and went to secure the house, checking the shutters and loading his rifles. Through the window, he could see an orange glow on the horizon where the Harrow barn still burned. By now, Gentry would have the fire under control, but his rage would burn hotter and longer than any flame. Caleb settled into a chair by the front window, his Winchester across his knees and his Colt on the table beside him. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the prairie. It would make it harder for anyone to approach unseen, but it would also mask the sound of horses if Gentry decided to strike tonight. As he kept watch, Caleb's mind turned over the events of the evening. He'd crossed a line tonight, made an enemy of the most powerful man in the county. His quiet life of solitary ranching was over, one way or another. But when he thought of Lydia's terrified face in that barn, of Gentry advancing on her with that broken bottle, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Mrs. Chen emerged from the guest room an hour later, carrying a basin of pink-tinged water. She set it down and approached Caleb, her dark eyes serious. "The young miss has many bruises, some old, some new," she said quietly. "This not first time that evil man hurt her." Caleb's jaw clenched. "How old?" "Week, maybe 2. She tried to hide them with powder and high collars, but I see." Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. "She say Gentry come to her father's house after funeral, say he own everything now, including her. She try to leave, go back east to relatives, but he stop her at train station, drag her back." "Why didn't she go to the sheriff?" Mrs. Chen gave him a look that questioned his intelligence. "Sheriff Morrison? Who eat dinner at Gentry's house every Sunday? Who got elected because Gentry told people to vote for him? You think he helped? Caleb cursed under his breath. She was right, of course. Sheriff Morrison was so deep in Gentry's pocket he could count the man's coins. The law in Silver Creek was whatever Silas Gentry said it was. How is she now? He asked. Sleeping. I give her laudanum for pain. She's strong girl, but scared. Very scared. Mrs. Chen paused, then added, She asked about you. Want to know if you hurt? I'm fine. Mrs. Chen snorted. You bleeding through shirt on left side. Let me see. Caleb looked down, surprised to see a dark stain spreading across his ribs, where Gentry had caught him with something, probably a spur or belt buckle in their struggle. He hadn't even felt it, the adrenaline masking the pain. Now that he was aware of it, though, a sharp ache made itself known. It's nothing, he started to say, but Mrs. Chen was already unbuttoning his shirt with the practiced efficiency of a woman who'd raised 6 sons back in China before circumstances brought her to America. The wound wasn't deep, but it was ugly. A jagged gash about 4 inches long that would need stitching. Mrs. Chen cleaned it with the same gentle thoroughness she'd shown on Lydia, though she kept up a running commentary about foolish men who thought they were invincible. You like her, she observed as she threaded a needle. The Harrow girl. I respect her, Caleb corrected, then winced as the needle bit into his flesh. Respect. Mrs. Chen made a sound that might have been a laugh. I see how you look at her when she come to town, like hungry man looking at feast through window. She's a lady. You just man who risk life to save her, who give her shelter when she have nowhere else to go, who sit up all night with gun to protect her. Mrs. Chen tied off the last stitch and began wrapping a bandage around his ribs. Maybe you just cowboy, Mr. Caleb, but you better man than most who call themselves gentlemen. Before Caleb could respond, the sound of horses splashing through the creek reached them through the storm. He was on his feet instantly, Winchester in hand, moving to the window. Through the rain, he could make out 4 riders approaching slowly, their hands visible and away from their weapons. That's not Gentry's crew, Caleb muttered, recognizing the lead rider's distinctive posture. It's Tom Morrison, the sheriff. This could either be very good or very bad. Mrs. Chen, go check on Miss Harrow. Make sure she stays in her room no matter what she hears. The elderly woman nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, and lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the riders as they approached. Sheriff Tom Morrison was a tall, thin man in his 50s with a handlebar mustache that he waxed religiously and eyes that never seemed to settle on anything for long. He'd been a decent lawman once, before Gentry's money corrupted him, and sometimes Caleb thought he could still see traces of that decent man struggling to surface. Evening, Caleb, Morrison called out, stopping his horse at a respectful distance. Mind if we get out of this rain? Depends on why you're here, Tom. Silas Gentry's barn burned down tonight. He says you did it. And what else does he say? Morrison shifted in his saddle, water running off the brim of his hat. He says you stole something from him. Says you attacked him without provocation and made off with his property. If by property you mean Miss Lydia Harrow, then you and I are going to have a problem, Sheriff. Now, Caleb, you know I'm just here to uphold the law. The law? Caleb's voice cracked like a whip. Where was the law when Thomas Harrow died under suspicious circumstances? Where was the law when Gentry produced those forged papers claiming Tom owed him money? Where was the law when that bastard locked Miss Harrow in a barn and tried to... He stopped himself, knowing that saying too much could make things worse for Lydia. Morrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. Those are serious accusations. You got any proof? I've got a woman inside with bruises and cuts that say Gentry's been abusing her. That proof enough for you? Could have happened when you abducted her. That's what Gentry's claiming. Caleb took a step forward, and the 3 deputies with Morrison tensed. Tom, you've known me 7 years. Have you ever known me to lay hands on a woman? No, Morrison admitted. But Gentry's a powerful man, Caleb. He wants you arrested for arson, assault, and kidnapping. I've got to bring you in. The hell you do. Now don't make this harder than it needs to be. You come peaceful-like, and we'll get this sorted out. Maybe Miss Harrow can make a statement, clear things up. Caleb laughed bitterly. You think I'm fool enough to leave her here unprotected while I sit in your jail? The minute I'm gone, Gentry's men will be here to drag her back. I'll post a deputy. One of these deputies? Caleb gestured at the three men with Morrison. Bobby there owes Gentry money from poker. Jim's brother works at Gentry's lumber mill. And Pete's been sweet on Gentry's housemaid for 2 years, and we all know how that could be used against him. You want to tell me which one of them is going to stand up to their boss to protect Miss Harrow? The deputies shifted uncomfortably, none of them denying the accusations. Morrison's face flushed red, though whether from anger or shame, Caleb couldn't tell. You're putting me in a difficult position, Caleb. And you're putting Miss Harrow in a dangerous one, Tom. You know what Gentry is. You know what he's capable of. How many young women have disappeared from the saloons he owns? How many families has he driven off their land with tactics that skirt just inside the law or outside it when he thinks no one's looking? Morrison was quiet for a long moment, rain pattering on his slicker. Finally, he said, I can give you until morning. Come dawn, if you're not at my office with Miss Harrow to make a formal statement, I'll have to come back with more men. And Caleb, Gentry's got men watching your place. You try to run, they'll know. I'm not running, Tom. This is my land, and I'll defend it and anyone under my protection. Morrison turned his horse around, then paused. For what it's worth, I believe you. About all of it. But believing and proving are two different things, and Gentry owns too many people in this county for believing to matter much. As the sheriff and his deputies rode away, Caleb remained on the porch, watching until they disappeared into the darkness. The rain was picking up again, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to capture the essence of the situation. Mr. Mercer. He turned to find Lydia standing in the doorway, wrapped in one of Mrs. Chen's robes. Her face was pale but determined, the cut above her eye neatly bandaged. She'd washed the blood from her hair, and it hung damp and loose around her shoulders, making her look younger and more vulnerable than her 24 years. You should be resting, he said gently. I heard voices. Was it Gentry? Sheriff Morrison. He's giving us until morning to come in and make a statement. Lydia laughed, but there was no humor in it. A statement, as if the truth matters to any of them. It might, if we can find proof of what Gentry's been doing. Miss Harrow, Lydia, your father must have kept records, papers, something that might contradict Gentry's claims. She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the rain-soaked landscape. He did. Father was meticulous about such things, but after he died, Gentry had his men search the house. They tore it apart looking for something. I assumed they were just making sure there was nothing to challenge the forged debt papers. Or maybe they were looking for something else, something your father had on Gentry. Lydia turned to him, hope flickering in her eyes. Father did say something before he died. He was delirious with fever, but he kept talking about the floorboards in his study. I thought he was just confused, but what if he hid something there? Caleb finished. Something Gentry's men didn't find. But how could we get to it? Gentry has men at the house. Caleb considered. It would be dangerous, possibly suicidal, but if there was evidence that could bring Gentry down, it might be their only chance. Not tonight, he decided. Tonight, we prepare. Tomorrow, after we deal with the sheriff, we'll figure out a way to get into that house. Lydia nodded, then surprised him by placing her hand on his arm. Mr. Mercer, Caleb, I haven't properly thanked you. What you did tonight, what you're risking for me. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Her green eyes were intense, holding his. My father always said you were one of the few truly good men in this county. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should go to you for help. I was too proud, too stubborn to listen. I thought I could handle Gentry on my own. She touched the bandage above her eye. I was wrong. Your father was a good man too. He didn't deserve what happened to him. He was murdered, Lydia said quietly. I know he was, even if I can't prove it. Father was healthy as a horse until Gentry started pressuring him to sell. Then suddenly he fell ill, and the doctor, one of Gentry's poker buddies, said it was his heart. But Father had no history of heart problems. Poison. That's what I suspect. but without examining the body. She shuddered. Gentry had him buried quickly, said it was the Christian thing to do in the summer heat. They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. Then Lydia shivered, and Caleb realized she was standing in the cold rain in nothing but a thin robe. "Come inside," he said. "Mrs. Chen will make us some coffee, and we can plan for tomorrow." As they turned to go in, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering the doorframe inches from Lydia's head. Caleb reacted instinctively, pulling her down and shielding her with his body as they scrambled inside. More shots followed, shattering windows and thudding into the log walls. "Stay down!" Caleb shouted to Mrs. Chen, who had dropped behind the kitchen counter. He grabbed his rifle and returned fire through the broken window, though he couldn't see the shooters in the darkness. The gunfire continued for several minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. Caleb waited, counting to 30 before risking a look outside. Nothing moved except the rain. "Warning shots," he said grimly. "Gentry's letting us know he's watching." Lydia was trembling, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "He won't stop, will he? Not until he has what he wants." "No," Caleb agreed, "he won't stop. But neither will I." He helped her to her feet, noting how she instinctively stayed close to him, trusting his protection. It was a responsibility he didn't take lightly. "Mrs. Chen, can you board up these windows?" The elderly woman nodded, already moving to gather supplies. "I fix. You watch for more trouble." Caleb spent the next hour fortifying the house as best he could, moving furniture to block windows and doors, creating defensive positions. Lydia helped, following his instructions without question, and he was impressed by her calm efficiency despite the circumstances. As they worked, she told him more about the weeks since her father's death, how Gentry had first tried to court her, bringing flowers and making promises, then gradually becoming more aggressive when she refused him, how he'd isolated her, turned the townspeople against her with rumors and lies, until she had nowhere to turn. "He said I could either marry him or be his mistress," she said, her voice filled with quiet fury. "Either way, he'd have the ranch and me." When I continued to refuse, he got violent. "Why didn't you leave?" "Go back east?" "I tried. 3 times. Each time his men stopped me, the last time. She unconsciously touched her ribs. The last time he made it clear that running wasn't an option." Caleb felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Well, you're under my protection now, and I promise you he won't lay another hand on you." "You can't fight him alone, Caleb. He has too many men, too much power." "Maybe, but I've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" "Nothing left to lose except my life, and I made peace with losing that a long time ago. Gentry, on the other hand, has everything to lose. His empire, his reputation, his freedom, if we can prove what he's done." They worked in companionable silence after that, and by the time they were finished, the house was as secure as they could make it. Mrs. Chen had prepared a simple meal of stew and bread, and they ate quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. As the storm continued to rage outside, Caleb found himself studying Lydia in the lamplight. Despite everything she'd been through, there was a strength to her, a core of steel beneath the refined exterior. She was nothing like the delicate Eastern flower he'd imagined her to be. She was tough, resilient, a true daughter of the frontier despite her education and manners. "You're staring," she said softly, catching him off guard. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's all right." She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "I was staring too." "You're not what I expected, Caleb Mercer." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone harder, I suppose. Colder. The other ranchers, they're all about land and cattle and money. But you—" She paused, searching for words. "You're different. I'm just a man trying to do what's right." "That's what makes you different." Their eyes met and held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Mrs. Chen bustled in, breaking the spell. "Miss Lydia need rest. Tomorrow be difficult day." Lydia stood reluctantly. "She's right. I should try to sleep." She paused at the doorway. "Caleb, thank you for everything." After she'd gone, Caleb resumed his position by the window, rifle at the ready. Mrs. Chen brought him coffee and sat with him for a while, neither of them speaking. The storm was finally beginning to pass, the rain tapering off to a drizzle. Around midnight, Caleb saw movement near the barn. He tensed, raising his rifle, but it was just a deer spooked by something in the darkness. Still, it was a reminder that Gentry's men were out there, watching, waiting. The hours crawled by. Caleb dozed fitfully in his chair, jerking awake at every sound. Once, he thought he heard horses, but it might have been thunder in the distance. As dawn approached, the sky began to lighten in the east, revealing a landscape washed clean by the storm. He was just thinking about making more coffee when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching. He moved to the window and counted at least a dozen riders, with Gentry himself in the lead. "Mrs. Chen," he called urgently. "Get Miss Harrow and get to the root cellar, now." The elderly woman didn't question, just hurried to comply. Caleb checked his weapons, knowing he couldn't hold off that many men for long, but he'd make them pay for every inch of ground. The riders stopped just outside rifle range, and Gentry rode forward alone, a white handkerchief tied to his rifle barrel. "Parley, Mercer," he called out. "I want to talk." Every instinct told Caleb it was a trap, but he needed to buy time. He stepped out onto the porch, his rifle ready. "Talk from there, Gentry." "That's close enough." Gentry's face was mottled with rage, but he was sober now, which made him far more dangerous. "You've got something that belongs to me, Cowboy." "I want her back. She's not property, Gentry. She's a free woman who came here of her own will. She's a confused girl who's been taken advantage of by a no-account drifter, but I'm willing to be reasonable. Send her out, and we'll call it even. You can go back to your little ranch, and I'll forget this ever happened. And if I don't—" Gentry's smile was cold. "Then I'll burn you out. Kill you, probably kill that old Chinese woman too. Make it look like Indians did it. Morrison won't look too hard, and even if he does, my men will swear they were playing poker with me all night. You'd murder innocent people just to get your hands on one woman. I'd do whatever it takes to get what's mine. And Lydia Harrow is mine, bought and paid for with the money her father owed me. Her father owed you nothing, and you know it." Gentry shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I know, matters what I can prove. And I've got papers that say different." They were at an impasse. Caleb could see Gentry's men spreading out, trying to flank the house. In a few minutes, they'd be in position to rush from multiple directions. He needed to do something unexpected, something to throw them off balance. That's when he saw it, movement in the rocks behind Gentry's men. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Then he saw it again and recognized the distinctive shape of a cavalry hat. "Gentry!" he called out, fighting to keep the relief from his voice. "You ever hear of the 7th Cavalry? What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that I spent 3 years scouting for them before I settled here. Made some good friends. The kind of friends who don't forget." Gentry laughed. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" A bugle call split the morning air, and suddenly a dozen cavalry soldiers appeared on the ridge behind Gentry's men, their Springfield rifles trained on the outlaws. At their head was Captain James Harrison, Caleb's old commanding officer, his weathered face stern beneath his campaign hat. "Morning, Caleb," the captain called out conversationally. "Heard you might be having some trouble." Gentry's men were looking around nervously, suddenly outnumbered and outgunned. Several were already raising their hands in surrender. "This is none of the Army's business," Gentry sputtered. "Well, now that's where you're wrong," Captain Harrison said, riding closer. "Got a telegram yesterday from the territorial governor. Seems he's been getting complaints about a certain land grabber terrorizing honest folk. Asked me to look into it. And what do I find? Armed men surrounding the home of a decorated Army scout. That makes it very much my business. I've got the law on my side. Sheriff Morrison is currently explaining himself to a federal marshal who arrived on the morning train," the captain interrupted, "along with some very interesting documents that were found hidden in the floorboards of Thomas Harrow's study." Caleb's heart jumped. Somehow, they'd gotten to the evidence. Gentry's face had gone pale. "What documents?" "Oh, just little things, like a signed confession from one of your men about poisoning Thomas Harrow, records of bribes paid to Sheriff Morrison, proof that those debt papers were forged, that sort of thing. It was a lie. It had to be. There was no way they could have gotten into the Harrow house. But Gentry didn't know that, and Caleb could see the fear creeping into his eyes. "You're lying," Gentry said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Why don't you come with us and find out? I'm sure the federal marshal would love to hear your side of things." For a moment, Caleb thought Gentry might actually surrender. Then the man's hand went for his gun. Caleb's rifle was already rising, but he wasn't fast enough. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. Through the pain, he heard multiple rifles fire, saw Gentry jerk as bullets struck him, saw him topple from his horse. Then Lydia was there, having emerged from hiding despite the danger, her arms around him, pressing something against his bleeding shoulder. "Don't you dare die on me, Caleb Mercer," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare." He looked up at her, seeing tears streaming down her face, and managed a weak smile. "Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am." The rest of Gentry's men were surrendering, throwing down their weapons as the cavalry closed in. Captain Harrison dismounted and approached, his face concerned. "How bad is it?" "I'll live," Caleb grunted, though the pain was excruciating. "Good, because I've got some explaining to do." The captain grinned. "We weren't really here on the governor's orders. Mrs. Chen sent a telegram yesterday when you were getting supplies in town. Said you were in trouble and needed help. Lucky for you, we were on maneuvers just 2 days' ride away." Caleb looked at Mrs. Chen, who had appeared with medical supplies. The elderly woman shrugged. "I know you too proud to ask for help, so I ask for you." Despite the pain, Caleb laughed. Then he looked at Gentry's still form. "Is he dead?" the captain confirmed. "His men will stand trial, but their boss won't be hurting anyone else." As the soldiers rounded up the outlaws and misses, Chen tended to his wound. Caleb felt a strange sense of peace. It was over. Lydia was safe. The ranch was safe. The cost had been high, but justice had been served. "Caleb," Lydia said softly, her hand finding his. "What Captain Harrison said about documents in my father's study was a bluff," the captain admitted. "But now that Gentry's dead and his men are in custody, I'm betting we'll find plenty of evidence of his crimes. Dead men tell no tales, but their papers often do." Over the next few hours, as the doctor from town treated Caleb's shoulder and the federal marshal took statements, the truth began to emerge. One of Gentry's men, hoping for leniency, confessed to being present when Gentry had poisoned Thomas Harrow's whiskey. Another revealed where Gentry kept his real account books, showing years of fraud and theft. By sunset, the full scope of Gentry's crimes was clear, and Sheriff Morrison was in custody along with a dozen others. The Harrow Ranch was officially restored to Lydia, and warrants were out for the rest of Gentry's organization. As Caleb sat on his porch that evening, his arm in a sling but his spirit light, Lydia came to sit beside him. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the air was sweet with the scent of rain-washed sage. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do. You saved my life, my ranch, my father's honor. That's a debt I can never repay." Caleb turned to look at her, seeing the way the dying light caught in her auburn hair, the strength and vulnerability in her green eyes. "I don't want your gratitude, Lydia." "Then what do you want?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Caleb thought about all the reasons he should stay quiet, maintain the proper distance between them. She was a lady, educated and refined. He was just a cowboy who'd gotten lucky. But then he remembered something Mrs. Chen had said, "You better man than most who call themselves gentlemen." "I want you to be free," he said finally. "Free to choose your own path, make your own decisions. Whether that path leads east or keeps you here, whether it includes me or doesn't, that should be your choice, not made out of obligation or gratitude." Lydia was quiet for a long moment, then she surprised him by laughing. Not the bitter laugh from earlier, but something warm and genuine. "You really don't know, do you?" she said. "Know what?" "I've been watching you too, Caleb Mercer. For years. Every Sunday when you'd come to town for supplies, I'd find excuses to be at the general store. When you helped rebuild the church after the fire, I volunteered to bring lunch to the workers just so I could talk to you." Caleb stared at her, stunned. "But you never... you barely spoke to me." Because I was Thomas Harrow's daughter, and you were beneath my station, or so everyone kept telling me. But I saw who you really were. The way you treated Mrs. Chen when everyone else shunned her. The way you helped the Martinez family when their crops failed, never asking for repayment. The way you stood up to Gentry's men when they were harassing the saloon girls, even though it earned you enemies. She turned to face him fully, her hand covering his. My father was right. You are one of the few truly good men in this county, and if I stay, when I stay, it won't be out of gratitude. It will be because I choose to, because I want to build something here, something good and true. And if you'll have me, I'd like to build it with you. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart years ago when he'd decided that some dreams weren't meant for men like him. But here was Lydia Harrow, offering him everything he'd never dared hope for. It won't be easy, he warned. Ranching is hard work, and there'll be those who talk, who say you've lowered yourself. She silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. Let them talk. I've seen what their version of propriety leads to. Men like Gentry, women trapped in gilded cages. I want something real, Caleb, something honest. He caught her hand, holding it gently. Then stay. Help me make this ranch something special, not the biggest or the richest, but the best. A place where people are treated fairly, where the land is respected, where there's always room at the table for those who need it. Yes, she said simply, and sealed it with a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once, full of promise and hope. The weeks that followed Gentry's death brought changes to Silver Creek that no one had anticipated. Word of the confrontation spread through the territory like wildfire, and suddenly the small town found itself at the center of a federal investigation that would reshape the power structure of the entire county. Caleb's shoulder healed slowly, the bullet wound a constant reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. But as October painted the Montana mountains in shades of gold and rust, something new was taking root between him and Lydia, something that went deeper than gratitude or circumstance. Lydia had moved back to her father's house, but she spent most of her days at the Rolling M, working alongside Caleb to prepare for the winter that would soon descend upon them. She'd traded her Eastern dresses for practical riding skirts and boots, though she still maintained an elegance that made Caleb's breath catch when he watched her working with the horses or helping Mrs. Chen preserve vegetables from the garden. You're staring again, she said one afternoon, not looking up from the ledger she was reviewing. They were in Caleb's study, going over the ranch accounts together. The federal marshal had frozen most of Gentry's assets, but there were rumors that some of his ill-gotten gains might be returned to those he'd cheated, including the Harrow estate. Can't help it, Caleb admitted, setting down his coffee cup. Still can't believe you're really here. She looked up then, her green eyes warm with something that made his heart skip. Where else would I be? Boston, maybe, with your mother's family, living the life you were meant for. Lydia closed the ledger and moved around the desk to where he sat, perching on the arm of his chair. The life I was meant for? Caleb Mercer, when are you going to understand that I'm exactly where I want to be? Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the window, they could see a group of riders approaching, not the federal marshals who'd been coming and going for weeks, but townspeople. At their head was Mayor Aldrich, a portly man who'd somehow managed to avoid being implicated in Gentry's schemes despite dining at the man's table every week. What do you suppose they want? Lydia asked, tension creeping into her voice. Only one way to find out. Caleb stood, his hand automatically checking the Colt at his hip. Old habits died hard, especially after what they'd been through. They met the delegation on the porch, Mrs. Chen joining them with her own suspicious glare at the visitors. Mayor Aldrich dismounted heavily, his face red from the ride. Afternoon, Caleb, Miss Harrow, he said, removing his hat. We've come to discuss a matter of some importance to the town. Speak your piece, Aldrich, Caleb said, not bothering with pleasantries. He hadn't forgotten how quickly the mayor had sided with Gentry when it served his purposes. Yes, well... Aldrich cleared his throat nervously. With Sheriff Morrison in federal custody and likely to hang for his crimes, we need a new lawman. The town council has met, and we'd like to offer you the position, Caleb. Caleb couldn't have been more surprised if Aldrich had asked him to run for governor. Me? I'm no lawman. You stood up to Gentry when no one else would. You've got military experience, the respect of the cavalry, and now that Miss Harrow has vouched for your character. Aldrich glanced at Lydia with something approaching respect. Well, the council is unanimous. I'm a rancher, Caleb said firmly. I've got no interest in wearing a badge. One of the other councilmen, Walter Hayes, spoke up. We're prepared to make it worth your while. The salary is substantial, and you could hire deputies to handle the day-to-day matters. We need someone with integrity, Caleb. Someone who can't be bought. Lydia placed a hand on Caleb's arm. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before giving an answer? Caleb looked at her, seeing something in her eyes he couldn't quite read. Give us a day to think it over, he told the delegation. After they'd gone, Caleb and Lydia walked out to the corral where his horses grazed peacefully. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, and the mountains stood sentinel in the distance, their peaks already dusted with the first snow of the season. You think I should take it? Caleb said. It wasn't a question. I think Silver Creek needs someone like you, someone who understands that the law should protect everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful. It would mean spending time in town, away from the ranch. The ranch will survive. We could hire more hands, maybe promote Miguel to foreman. He's ready for more responsibility. Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. We? Lydia flushed slightly. I mean, if you're agreeable, I thought, that is, Father's ranch and the Rolling M share a border. It would make sense to combine operations, pool our resources. Is that the only reason? Caleb asked, stepping closer to her. She looked up at him, her chin lifting in that defiant way he'd come to love. You know it's not. Lydia Harrow, are you proposing a business arrangement? I'm proposing a partnership, she said softly. In every sense of the word. Caleb's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. People will talk. The daughter of Thomas Harrow and a common cowboy. You're not common, she interrupted fiercely. You're extraordinary, and I don't care what people say. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to others' expectations. And where did it get me? Nearly forced into Gentry's bed, nearly broken by a man who saw me as property to be owned. She took his hands in hers. You're the only man who's ever seen me as I truly am, who's valued my strength instead of trying to diminish it. Lydia. He pulled her closer, his hand settling on her waist. Are you sure? This life, it's not easy. The winters are hard, the work is endless, and I'll face it all gladly, she said, if I'm facing it with you. He kissed her then, there in the corral with the horses as witnesses and the mountains as their cathedral. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Is that a yes to the sheriff position? She asked with a smile that made his heart turn over. Woman, you could talk me into anything, he said, which made her laugh, a sound he was determined to hear every day for the rest of his life. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Captain Harrison arrived with a small detachment of cavalry and a man Caleb didn't recognize. A distinguished gentleman in an expensive suit who looked distinctly out of place on the frontier. Caleb, Miss Harrow, the captain said as they gathered in the main room of the ranch house. This is Mr. Charles Pennington from the Department of Interior in Washington. Pennington extended his hand, his grip surprisingly firm. Mr. Mercer, Miss Harrow, I've come a long way to speak with you both. About what? Caleb asked, instantly wary. In his experience, government men from Washington rarely brought good news. About what lies beneath your land, Pennington said, producing a leather portfolio from his satchel. Our geological surveys indicate substantial oil deposits in this region. Silas Gentry knew about it. That's why he was so desperate to control as much land as possible. Lydia gasped. Oil? On our land. Specifically, on the border between your properties extending into both ranches. The deposits could be worth millions. Caleb felt the room spin slightly. Millions. It was an incomprehensible sum, more money than he could imagine. But his mind immediately went to what such a discovery could mean, not wealth, but trouble. Men had killed for far less. What does the government want? He asked bluntly. Pennington smiled. Straight to the point. I like that. The government wants to ensure these resources are developed responsibly, not exploited by robber barons who care nothing for the land or its people. We're prepared to offer you a partnership, federal protection and investment in exchange for a percentage of the profits. And if we refuse, then you'll be very wealthy people with a very large target on your backs. Every oil speculator and would-be baron from here to New York will descend on Silver Creek. What happened with Gentry will seem like a pleasant memory compared to what's coming. Captain Harrison spoke up. He's right, Caleb. I've seen what happens when oil is discovered. It's like gold fever, but worse. The government's offer isn't perfect, but it's better than trying to stand alone. Caleb looked at Lydia, seeing his own concerns reflected in her eyes. They'd fought so hard for their freedom, for the right to live as they chose. Now that freedom was threatened by the very wealth that should have secured it. We need time to consider, Lydia said diplomatically. This is not a decision to be made lightly. Of course, Pennington agreed. I'll be staying at the hotel in town for the week. But I should warn you, word is already spreading. We intercepted telegrams Gentry sent before his death. Other interested parties are already on their way. After the men left, Caleb and Lydia sat in stunned silence. Mrs. Chen brought them tea, her weathered face creased with concern. Trouble coming, she said simply. Big trouble. Maybe, Caleb agreed. Or maybe opportunity. If we handle this right, we could use that wealth to build something lasting. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure that would benefit everyone in Silver Creek. And if we handle it wrong? Lydia asked. Then we'll have fought off one devil only to invite in a dozen more. That evening, as they were finishing dinner, Miguel rode in hard from the northern pasture, his face grim. Boss, we got company. Armed men, maybe 20, camped just outside your property line. They're not trying to hide, got big fires going, like they want us to know they're there. Caleb strapped on his gun belt. Federal marshals? Don't think so. Too well dressed, and they've got fancy equipment, saw surveying tools and what looked like drilling samples. Oil men, Lydia said quietly. It's starting already. Caleb made a decision. Miguel, ride to town. Tell Mayor Aldrich I'll take the sheriff job, but I want to be sworn in tonight. Then stop at the telegraph office and wire Captain Harrison. Tell him we might need those soldiers sooner than expected. As Miguel rode off, Caleb began checking weapons and ammunition. Lydia worked beside him, her movements efficient and practiced now. You know this changes everything, she said. Once word spreads about the oil, Silver Creek will never be the same. Change isn't always bad, Caleb replied, though he shared her concerns. The question is whether we control the change or let it control us. A knock at the door interrupted them. Caleb opened it cautiously, gun in hand, to find a well-dressed woman standing on his porch. She was perhaps 40, with sharp features and calculating eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of Gentry. Mr. Mercer? My name is Victoria Ashford. I represent a consortium of Eastern investors interested in developing the natural resources of this region. Not interested, Caleb said, starting to close the door. She placed a gloved hand on it, stopping him. You haven't heard my offer. Don't need to. The answer is no. $5 million, she said calmly. Cash. For both your ranch and Miss Harrow's. You could go anywhere, do anything, never work another day in your lives. Lydia appeared beside Caleb. Our land isn't for sale, Mrs. Ashford. Everything is for sale, my dear. It's just a matter of price. Victoria's smile was cold. And if you won't sell willingly, well, accidents happen on the frontier. Ranches burn, cattle die, people disappear. Are you threatening us? Caleb's voice was dangerously quiet. Merely observing the realities of life in such a remote location. My employers are determined to develop this oil field, Mr. Mercer. You can be partners in that development, or you can be obstacles to be removed. The choice is yours. Get off my land, Caleb said. You've got 10 seconds before I help you along. Victoria's composure never wavered. You're making a mistake. We could have been civilized about this. She turned to go, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Mercer? That quaint notion of becoming sheriff won't protect you. We own sheriffs from here to Chicago. We'll own you too, eventually. After she left, Caleb and Lydia stood in tense silence. The threat was clear. They were facing something far more dangerous than Silas Gentry had ever been. This wasn't about one man's greed, this was about corporate power, the kind that could buy judges and senators. "Maybe we should consider Pennington's offer," Lydia said quietly. "Federal protection might be our only option." Before Caleb could respond, they heard it, the thunder of many horses approaching fast. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, then relaxed slightly. It was Mayor Aldrich, accompanied by several townspeople and, surprisingly, Judge William Crawford, the circuit judge who happened to be in town for the federal investigation. "Heard you had some unwelcome visitors," the mayor said as Caleb met them on the porch. "Thought we'd better make this official before things get complicated." Judge Crawford, a stern man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Mercer, Mayor Aldrich has explained the situation. I'm prepared to swear you in as sheriff of Silver Creek immediately, if you're willing." Caleb looked at Lydia, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm willing." The ceremony was brief but carried weight. As Judge Crawford administered the oath, Caleb felt the responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical thing. When the judge pinned the star to his shirt, several of the townspeople applauded. "Your first act as sheriff," Judge Crawford said, "might be to investigate those men camped north of town. I believe they're trespassing on federal land." Caleb understood immediately. The judge was giving him legal grounds to confront the oil speculators. "I'll need deputies," Caleb said. "Already thought of that," Aldrich replied. "Tom Brennan and Jake Martinez have volunteered. They're good men, and they can't be bought." As the group prepared to ride out, Lydia pulled Caleb aside. "Be careful. Victoria Ashford doesn't make idle threats." "I know. Will you be all right here? Mrs. Chen and I will manage. We've got plenty of ammunition, and Miguel's staying behind with some of the hands." He kissed her quickly, not caring who saw. "I'll be back before dawn." The ride to the speculators' camp was tense. Caleb's new deputies flanked him, both men he'd known for years and trusted. Behind them rode a dozen townspeople, all armed, all understanding that this confrontation would set the tone for everything that followed. The camp was even larger than Miguel had described. At least 30 men, with expensive tents and equipment that must have cost a fortune. Guards with rifles patrolled the perimeter, and Caleb recognized the type. Hired guns, probably veterans of range wars and mining disputes. A man emerged from the largest tent as they approached. He was tall and lean, with the bearing of an ex-military officer and cold eyes that assessed threats automatically. "That's far enough," he called out. "This is private property." Caleb held up his sheriff's star, making sure it caught the firelight. "Actually, you're on federal land, which makes this my jurisdiction. I'm Sheriff Mercer, and I'm ordering you to break camp and move on." The man laughed. "Sheriff? Since when? An hour ago?" "Since about 30 minutes ago, actually, but the badge is real and so is my authority. You've got 1 hour to pack up and get across the county line." "And if we refuse?" Caleb's hand rested on his gun. "Then I arrest you all for trespassing, and we let a federal judge sort it out. Of course, that would mean your employers lose valuable time while their competition moves in. I hear 3 other consortiums are already on their way." That got the man's attention. Competition was the one thing these speculators feared more than the law. "You're bluffing." "Tom," Caleb said to Brennan, "didn't you see those telegrams at the office earlier from New York and Philadelphia?" Brennan caught on quickly. "Sure did, Sheriff. Something about Rockefeller himself being interested. The name Rockefeller worked like magic. The leader of the speculators cursed under his breath, then called out to his men. "Pack it up. We're moving." As the camp dissolved into organized chaos, the leader approached Caleb. "This isn't over, Sheriff. Mrs. Ashford doesn't like being thwarted. Tell Mrs. Ashford she's welcome to make a legitimate offer through proper channels. But any more threats or trespassing, and she'll be dealing with federal marshals, not just local law." The man's eyes narrowed. "You've got backbone, I'll give you that. But backbone won't stop a bullet in the dark." "Neither will killing me stop what's coming," Caleb replied calmly. "The oil's there whether I'm alive or dead. The only question is whether it gets developed legally or whether this whole region turns into a war zone. Your employers are businessmen. They should understand that war is bad for profits." Within the hour, the speculators were gone, though Caleb knew they'd be back. This was just the first skirmish in what would be a long battle. When he returned to the ranch, he found Lydia waiting on the porch, rifle in hand. The relief in her eyes when she saw him made his heart clench. "Any trouble here?" he asked. "Nothing we couldn't handle." A couple of riders came by, but they turned back when they saw we were ready for them. They went inside where Mrs. Chen had hot coffee waiting. As they sat by the fire, exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed Caleb. The weight of everything, the sheriff's badge, the oil discovery, the threats, seemed to press down on him. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" he asked quietly. Lydia moved to sit beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Something bigger than we expected, but we'll face it together." "Together," he agreed, pulling her closer. The next morning brought a new crisis. Miguel rode in with news that someone had poisoned the waterhole in the north pasture. 6 cattle were dead, and more were sick. "It's a message," Caleb said grimly as he surveyed the damage. "They're showing us what they can do." "We can't guard every water source, every section of fence," Lydia pointed out. "They can bleed us dry with tactics like this." She was right, and Caleb knew it. They needed a different strategy, something that would change the game entirely. As he stood there, looking at his dead cattle, an idea began to form. "Miguel," he said suddenly, "ride to town and send a telegram to every major newspaper from here to San Francisco. Tell them Sheriff Caleb Mercer has an announcement about the Silver Creek oil discovery that will interest their readers." "What are you planning?" Lydia asked. "If we can't fight them in the shadows, we'll drag them into the light. Make this whole thing public, so public that any violence against us becomes national news." It was a risky strategy, but it might be their only chance. By making themselves too visible to eliminate quietly, they could force the speculators to play by the rules. 3 days later, the ranch was overrun with reporters. They came from Denver, San Francisco, even a man from the New York Times. Caleb and Lydia gave them all the same message. The oil would be developed, but only in partnership with the federal government and with guarantees that the local community would benefit. The publicity had the desired effect. Victoria Ashford was forced to make her offers publicly, through lawyers rather than threats. Other companies joined the bidding, creating competition that drove up prices and gave Caleb and Lydia leverage they wouldn't have had otherwise. But the attention brought other problems. Fortune seekers flooded into Silver Creek, turning the quiet town into a boomtown almost overnight. Saloons opened on every corner, violence increased, and the very character of the place began to change. "This isn't what we wanted," Lydia said one evening as they watched a brawl spill out of one of the new saloons from the sheriff's office window. "No," Caleb agreed, "but it's what we've got. The question now is how we shape it." He'd hired 6 new deputies to deal with the increased lawlessness, good men who couldn't be corrupted, but it felt like trying to hold back a flood with their bare hands. That night, as they rode back to the ranch together, they found their gate torn down and a message painted on the fence: "Sell or burn." "Subtle," Lydia said dryly, though Caleb could see the fear in her eyes. They were running out of time and options. The various oil companies were becoming more aggressive, and even federal protection seemed uncertain as money changed hands in Washington. The next morning, Pennington returned with a modified offer. "The government is willing to make you both full partners in the development. 25% of all profits, plus guarantees of security and local investment." 50%, Lydia countered, surprising both men with her firmness. "And we want it in writing that a portion of the profits will go to building schools and hospitals in Silver Creek." Pennington started to protest, but Caleb backed her up. 50%, or we start talking to Standard Oil. I hear Rockefeller pays well for exclusive rights." It was a bluff. Rockefeller's company was as ruthless as any. But Pennington didn't know that. After hours of negotiation, they reached an agreement. 40% to Caleb and Lydia, 30% to the government, and 30% to a development company that would be carefully vetted. Most importantly, 10% of all profits would go into a trust for Silver Creek's development. As Pennington prepared the papers, Victoria Ashford made one last attempt. She arrived at the ranch with a small army of lawyers and gunmen, her offer now up to $10 million. "You're making a mistake," she said when they refused. "The government won't protect you forever, and when they lose interest, you'll be alone against forces you can't imagine." "Maybe," Caleb said, his hand resting on his sheriff's star. "But at least we'll be able to live with ourselves." Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. You think you're heroes? You're fools. This oil will be extracted one way or another. The only question is whether you're rich or dead when it happens. Then I guess we'll take our chances, Lydia said, stepping forward. Now get off our land, all of you. As Victoria's entourage departed, one of her gunmen lingered, a man with dead eyes and a tied-down holster. Sheriff, he said with mock respect, you might want to be extra careful tonight. Heard there might be trouble coming. It was clearly a threat, but before Caleb could respond, the man was gone. That night, they prepared for an attack. Caleb stationed deputies around the ranch, while Captain Harrison, who'd returned with a full company of cavalry, positioned his men strategically. Everyone waited tensely as darkness fell. The attack came at midnight. Not the frontal assault they'd expected, but something more insidious. Fire arrows began falling from the darkness, targeting the barn, the house, anything that would burn. At the same time, gunfire erupted from multiple directions, keeping everyone pinned down. "They're trying to burn us out!" Miguel shouted, racing to put out a fire that had started in the hay store. Caleb and his deputies returned fire, but their attackers were well hidden in the darkness. The cavalry couldn't engage effectively without risking friendly fire. Then Lydia did something unexpected. She grabbed a torch and ran toward the attacker's position, making herself a target but also illuminating their hiding spots. It was insanely brave and absolutely reckless. "Lydia, no!" Caleb roared, but she was already moving. Her desperate gambit worked. With their positions revealed, the cavalry could engage effectively. The tide of battle turned quickly, and the attackers began to retreat. But one of them, the dead-eyed gunman from earlier, had Lydia in his sights. Caleb saw him raise his rifle, saw the moment stretch out like eternity. He was too far away to reach her, too far to do anything but watch as the gunman jerked and fell, a rifle shot echoing from the hills. Everyone turned to see a figure on horseback silhouetted against the moon, an Indian warrior with a smoking rifle. "Joseph!" Lydia gasped, recognizing the man. Joseph Black Elk, son of a Crow chief and an old friend of Thomas Harrow, rode down from the hills with a band of warriors behind him. "Heard you were having trouble," he called out. "Thought you might need help." The remaining attackers fled at the sight of the Crow warriors. They'd expected to face cowboys and soldiers, not indigenous fighters who knew the land better than anyone. As dawn broke, the full extent of the attack became clear. The barn was partially burned, several cattle had been killed, but no people had been seriously hurt. More importantly, they'd captured 3 of the attackers, including one who was willing to testify that Victoria Ashford had hired them. "It's enough to arrest her," Caleb said, though he knew she'd probably never see the inside of a jail cell. People like Victoria had too many lawyers, too many connections, but the arrest warrant would at least force her to leave the territory, buying them time to consolidate their position. As they stood surveying the damage, Joseph Black Elk approached. "Your father was a good man," he told Lydia. "He respected our people, traded fairly. When I heard what was happening here, I knew we had to help." "Thank you," Lydia said, tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to repay you." "No repayment needed. But perhaps when this oil money comes, you'll remember that this was our land first. Maybe some of that wealth could help our people too." "Absolutely," Caleb said immediately. "We'll make sure of it." Joseph nodded, satisfied. "Then we'll stay for a while, help you guard against more attacks. These men who want your oil, they're like the ones who took our land. They understand only force, but together we're stronger than they are." Over the next few weeks, an uneasy peace settled over Silver Creek. Victoria Ashford had indeed fled to avoid arrest, though everyone knew she'd be back eventually, probably with a new name and new tactics. The oil development moved forward, with drilling equipment arriving under heavy guard. Caleb found himself pulled between his duties as sheriff and his responsibilities as a rancher and now oil partner. The town was changing rapidly, new buildings going up almost daily, the population tripling in a matter of months. "I barely recognize this place," he said to Lydia one evening as they stood on the hill overlooking Silver Creek. "Change was always coming," she replied. "The question was whether we'd guide it or be swept away by it." She was right, as usual. They'd managed to maintain some control over the transformation, ensuring that the wealth benefited more than just a few robber barons. Schools were being built, a hospital was planned, and the Crow tribe had been given a substantial stake in the oil profits. But the personal cost had been high. They lived under constant guard now, always watching for the next threat. The simple life Caleb had once known was gone forever. "Do you regret it?" he asked Lydia. "All of this?" She considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that greed drives men to such extremes. But regret our choices? Number. We did what we had to do to survive and protect what we love." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Caleb pulled Lydia close. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did now. There would be more speculators to face, more violence to prevent, more decisions that would shape the future of Silver Creek. But tonight, standing on their land with the woman he loved, Caleb felt a moment of peace. They'd fought for this, fought Gentry, fought the oil companies, fought everyone who'd tried to take what was theirs. And they'd won, at least for now. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words surprising him as much as her. Lydia turned to face him, her eyes wide. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, more certain now. "We've been partners in everything else. Let's make it official." She was quiet for so long he began to worry he'd misread everything between them. Then she smiled, that radiant smile that had first captured his heart. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then, there on the hillside with their land spread out before them and the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The oil would flow, the town would grow, and their lives would never be simple again. But in that moment, with Lydia in his arms and their future stretching out before them full of possibility, Caleb knew they'd made the right choice. They'd fought for their freedom, for their land, for their right to choose their own path. And in the end, that freedom was worth more than all the oil beneath their feet. The wedding was set for the first Sunday in November, barely 3 weeks away. But those 3 weeks would prove to be some of the most challenging yet. Word of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, and with it came a new wave of complications neither Caleb nor Lydia had anticipated. The morning after his proposal, Caleb woke to find a telegram slipped under his door at the sheriff's office where he'd been keeping watch. It was from Washington, from a name he didn't recognize. Senator Marcus Whitfield. The message was brief but ominous. "Your recent agreement with Department of Interior under review. Suggest postponing any major decisions. Will arrive Silver Creek within week." "What do you think it means?" Lydia asked when he showed her the telegram over breakfast at the ranch. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast, still celebrating their engagement, but neither of them had much appetite now. "It means someone in Washington doesn't like our deal," Caleb said grimly. "Someone with enough power to make a senator dance to their tune." Before Lydia could respond, they heard horses approaching fast. Through the window, they could see Joseph Black Elk riding hard with 2 of his warriors. Caleb met them on the porch, his hand instinctively checking his colt. "Trouble coming," Joseph said without preamble. "Many men gathering at the old Gentry place. Maybe 60, maybe more. They carry rifles, wear badges like lawmen, but they're not your deputies." "Badges?" Caleb frowned. "What kind of badges?" "Private security. Saw them during the railroad wars. These men are hired killers, but they wear tin to make their killing legal." Caleb cursed under his breath. Victoria Ashford or someone like her had found a new strategy. If they couldn't force him out as outlaws, they'd come as quasi-legal enforcement. "How long before they move?" he asked Joseph. "Tomorrow, maybe day after. They're waiting for something, or someone. The senator," Caleb realized. They were waiting for Senator Whitfield to arrive and provide political cover for whatever they were planning. "Joseph, can your men keep watching them?" The Crow warrior nodded. "We'll watch." "But Caleb, you need more guns. These aren't ranch hands or town drunks. These are professional killers." After Joseph left, Caleb and Lydia held a war council with their most trusted allies. Tom Brennan and Jake Martinez, his deputies, were there, along with Miguel, Mrs. Chen, and surprisingly Judge Crawford, who'd extended his stay in Silver Creek. "The law's on our side," the judge said, though his expression was troubled. "But if this Senator Whitfield has federal authority, he could complicate things. The question is, what's his real agenda?" "Money," Lydia said flatly. It's always about money. Someone wants our oil rights, and they're using political pressure instead of guns. Both, Caleb corrected. They're using both. Those men at Gentry's place aren't there for show. They spent the rest of the day preparing defenses and sending telegrams to every ally they could think of. Captain Harrison promised to keep his cavalry troop in the area, though he warned that without orders, he couldn't directly intervene in what might be considered a civil matter. That evening, as Caleb walked Lydia back to her father's house, where she'd been staying to maintain propriety before the wedding, they found another surprise waiting. An elegant carriage sat in front of the house, and standing beside it was a woman Lydia obviously recognized. "Aunt Margaret?" Lydia gasped. Margaret Harrow Pennington was everything her late brother Thomas hadn't been. Sophisticated, calculating, and dressed in the height of Boston fashion. She was in her 50s with silver streaking her carefully arranged hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Lydia, darling," she said, though her tone was anything but warm. "When I heard about your situation, I felt I had to come." "My situation?" Lydia's voice had gone cold. This absurd engagement to a Cowboy sheriff, this dangerous involvement with oil speculation. Really, dear, what would your mother think? Caleb felt Lydia tense beside him, but before she could respond, he stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Caleb Mercer. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Margaret looked at him like she might look at something unpleasant on her shoe. "No, Mr. Mercer, we haven't. And frankly, I don't see the need. Lydia will be returning to Boston with me immediately." "I will not," Lydia said firmly. "You will," Margaret countered, "unless you want to lose your entire inheritance from your mother's estate." The terms were quite clear. Any unsuitable marriage and the money reverts to the family trust. Caleb saw Lydia's face pale. He hadn't known about any inheritance, and clearly this was news she hadn't expected. "How much?" Lydia asked quietly. $300,000, properly invested. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life, provided you make sensible choices. Margaret's smile was triumphant. "So you see, dear, your little adventure here is over." Lydia was quiet for a long moment, and Caleb could see her wrestling with the decision. $300,000 was a fortune, more than the ranch and oil rights might ever produce. He wouldn't blame her if she chose security over the uncertain future he was offering. Then she laughed, surprising everyone, including herself. "You know what, Aunt Margaret? Keep it. Keep every penny." "Lydia, don't be foolish." "Foolish? You want to talk about foolish? Foolish is living your entire life according to someone else's rules. Foolish is choosing money over love, security over freedom. Foolish is ending up like you, rich, respectable, and utterly alone." Margaret's face flushed with anger. "You ungrateful child. Your mother would be appalled." "My mother died trying to please people like you," Lydia shot back. "She spent her whole life being the perfect society wife. And for what? She was miserable, and you know it. She did her duty." "Her duty?" Lydia's voice rose. "Her duty was to be happy, to live fully, to love freely. And that's exactly what I intend to do." She took Caleb's hand. "With this man, on this land, building something real instead of maintaining empty traditions." Margaret gathered herself, her voice turning icy. "Very well, but don't come crying to me when this all falls apart. And it will fall apart, my dear. Men like him don't last, and women like you don't survive without money." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Lydia? You should know that Senator Whitfield is my late husband's cousin. He's coming here as a personal favor to me, to talk sense into you. When that fails, well, I understand there are other interested parties who might benefit from his visit." The threat was clear. Margaret was somehow connected to the forces gathering against them. As her carriage pulled away, Caleb turned to Lydia, who was shaking with anger and something else. Maybe fear, maybe relief. $300,000, he said quietly. "That's a lot to give up." She looked up at him, her green eyes fierce. "You're worth more than any amount of money, Caleb Mercer. But more than that, my freedom is worth more. The right to choose my own path, make my own mistakes, live my own life. That's priceless." He kissed her then, not caring who might see. When they pulled apart, she was smiling through tears. Besides, she said, we have the oil rights. Who needs a Boston inheritance when we're sitting on black gold? But they both knew it wouldn't be that simple. The gathering storm clouds weren't just metaphorical anymore. The November sky was dark and heavy, promising an early winter storm. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He sat in the sheriff's office, going through every law book he could find, looking for something, anything, that might give them an edge against whatever was coming. Around 3 in the morning, Tom Brennan burst in. "Sheriff, Ryder's coming in fast. Looks like that senator's arrived early, and he's not alone." Caleb grabbed his coat and rifle. Outside, the wind was picking up, carrying the scent of snow. They made their way to the edge of town where a procession of carriages and riders was approaching. At its head was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s wrapped in an expensive fur coat. Senator Marcus Whitfield had the look of a man used to getting his way, silver hair, penetrating eyes, and a mouth set in a permanent expression of disapproval. He was accompanied by at least 20 men, all armed, all wearing federal badges of some sort. "Sheriff Mercer," the senator called out as his carriage stopped. "I understand you're the law in this town." "I am." "And you're out past curfew, Senator. We've had trouble with night riders recently." Whitfield's eyes narrowed. "Amusing. I'm here on federal business, Sheriff. I'll need to see all documents related to the oil rights agreement you and Miss Harrow signed with the Department of Interior. Those are private documents, Senator. You'll need a warrant." "I have one." Whitfield produced a paper with an official seal. "Signed by a federal judge in Washington. You can cooperate, Sheriff, or I can have you arrested for obstruction." Caleb examined the warrant. It looked legitimate, though he suspected money had changed hands to obtain it. "Fine. You can review the documents at the courthouse tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I'll review them now." "No, Senator, you won't. The courthouse is closed, the documents are locked in the safe, and I don't have the combination. Judge Crawford does, and I'm not waking him at 3 in the morning because you couldn't wait until a decent hour." It was a lie. Caleb had the combination, but he needed time to think, to plan. Whitfield's face darkened. "You're playing a dangerous game, Sheriff." "No games, Senator. Just following the law. You're welcome to find accommodation in town. The hotel has rooms available." For a moment, Caleb thought Whitfield might push the issue. Then the senator smiled coldly. "Very well, 9 o'clock. But Sheriff, if those documents aren't available exactly as specified, I'll have you in federal custody before noon." As the senator's procession moved toward the hotel, Tom Brennan whistled low. That's a powerful enemy to make, Caleb. He was already an enemy. Now at least we know where he stands. Caleb spent the remaining hours until dawn preparing. He sent Miguel to fetch Captain Harrison, telegraphed everyone he could think of who might help, and most importantly, he made copies of every document related to the oil agreement. At 8:30, Judge Crawford arrived at the courthouse, looking grim. "I've been doing some research on our Senator Whitfield," he said. "He's in the pocket of Standard Oil. Has been for years. So this is about forcing us to sell to Rockefeller. Most likely. The question is, what fabricated legal reason will he use?" They didn't have long to wait. At exactly 9 o'clock, Senator Whitfield arrived with his entourage, including several men Caleb recognized as lawyers. Lydia was already there, having insisted on being present despite Caleb's concerns for her safety. "The documents," Whitfield demanded without preamble. Judge Crawford produced them from the safe, handling them like they might explode. Whitfield's lawyers immediately began poring over them, making notes, whispering among themselves. After an hour, one of them looked up triumphantly. "The agreement is invalid, Senator. Miss Harrow's signature was executed while she was under duress, fleeing from criminal threats. Under federal law, any contract signed under such conditions is null and void." "That's ridiculous," Lydia protested. "I signed freely, fully understanding—" "You signed the day after Sheriff Mercer killed Silas Gentry," Whitfield interrupted, "while taking shelter from men trying to kill you." "That, Miss Harrow, is the very definition of duress." Caleb saw the trap now. They were using the very violence that had forced Lydia to seek his protection as grounds to invalidate the agreement. "Furthermore," Whitfield continued, "there's the question of Sheriff Mercer's authority to negotiate on behalf of the town. He wasn't sheriff when these negotiations began, and there's some question about the legitimacy of his appointment. My appointment was completely legal, Caleb said firmly. Perhaps. But was your relationship with Miss Harrow disclosed to the federal negotiators? A romantic involvement that could be seen as a conflict of interest? The senator was throwing everything at them, hoping something would stick. And the worst part was, he might be right on some technicalities. Judge Crawford stood up. Senator, these are matters for a court to decide, not for you to determine unilaterally. I agree, Whitfield said smoothly, which is why I'm placing the oil rights under federal injunction until a proper hearing can be held. No drilling, no development, no access to the sites until this matter is resolved. That could take years, Lydia said, understanding the strategy. They'd tie everything up in legal battles until Caleb and Lydia ran out of money to fight. Yes, it could, Whitfield agreed. Unless, of course, you choose to sell your rights to a qualified buyer who could navigate these legal challenges. I happen to know of such a buyer, willing to pay a fair price. Standard Oil, Caleb said flatly. A consortium of investors, actually, but yes, Standard Oil would be the managing partner. $1 million, split between you, more than generous for rights you can't develop. No, Lydia said immediately. Then I hope you have deep pockets for legal fees, Whitfield said, because you'll need them. As the senator prepared to leave, one of his men rushed in, face flushed with excitement. Senator, there's been a discovery. The men searching the Gentry property found something. Whitfield's eyes gleamed. Show me. They all followed the man to the old Gentry ranch, where the private security force had indeed been searching. In what had been Gentry's study, they'd torn up the floorboards and found a hidden strongbox. Break it open, Whitfield ordered. Inside were documents, contracts, deeds, and most damning, a journal in Gentry's own hand. Caleb felt his blood run cold as Whitfield began reading aloud. Paid Mercer $5,000 to look the other way when I take the Harrow girl. He's agreed to make it look like a rescue, then split the oil rights with me. That's a lie, Caleb roared, starting forward, but several guns were suddenly pointed at him. Whitfield continued reading. The fool thinks he's playing hero, but he's just another greedy rancher looking for a payday. Lydia grabbed the journal, studying it closely. This isn't Gentry's handwriting. I've seen enough of his documents to know. This is a forgery. That would be for handwriting experts to determine, Whitfield said. In the meantime, Sheriff Mercer, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. Everything happened fast then. Caleb saw the trap closing, saw the men moving to arrest him, and made a split-second decision. He grabbed Lydia and dove through the window, glass shattering around them as gunfire erupted. They hit the ground running, Caleb pulling Lydia toward the horses. Behind them, men were shouting, more guns firing. They mounted and rode hard, heading for the only place Caleb could think of that might be safe, Joseph Black Elk's camp in the hills. The Crow warriors met them at the boundary of their territory, having heard the gunfire. Joseph took one look at their faces and understood. How bad? He asked simply. They're framing me for conspiracy with Gentry, Caleb explained quickly. Forged documents, false charges. They want the oil rights, and they're willing to destroy us to get them. Joseph nodded grimly. Then you fight, but not on their terms. Come. He led them deeper into the hills, to a sheltered valley where the rest of his band was camped. There, around a fire with snow beginning to fall, they made plans. You need proof that the journal is forged, Joseph said, and you need it fast before they consolidate their position. The only person who could definitively prove it's a forgery is dead, Lydia said despairingly. Not the only person, Mrs. Chen said, appearing from the darkness. Miguel was with her, both having fled the ranch when federal marshals arrived to seize it. Gentry's housekeeper, Maria. She's still alive, hiding in the Mexican quarter. She knows his handwriting better than anyone. She wrote half his letters for him when he was too drunk. Hope flickered in Caleb's chest. Can you find her? Mrs. Chen nodded. But you need more than that. You need to prove who really forged those documents. Whitfield wouldn't do it himself, Caleb mused. Too risky. He'd have someone else do it, someone expendable. One of those private security men, Miguel suggested. They've been at the Gentry place for days. Plenty of time to plant evidence. They spent the night planning while snow fell heavily outside. By morning, the landscape was transformed, everything covered in a thick white blanket that would make tracking difficult but also make escape harder if things went wrong. The next day, Mrs. Chen and Miguel slipped back into town while Caleb and Lydia waited anxiously in the Crow camp. Joseph's warriors kept watch, reporting on the movements of federal marshals who were searching for them. Near sunset, Mrs. Chen returned with Maria, a frightened Mexican woman in her 40s who clutched a carpetbag like her life depended on it. "Senor Mercer," she said in accented English, "I know you are a good man." "Mr. Gentry, he spoke of you often, usually with curses. He never wrote such things about paying you. Never." She produced the carpetbag, revealing dozens of letters and documents in Gentry's actual handwriting. "I kept these. I thought someday they might be important." Lydia compared them to the forged journal. Even to an untrained eye, the differences were obvious once pointed out. Different slant to the letters, different spacing, subtle differences in how certain words were formed. "It's definitely a forgery," Lydia confirmed, "but we need to prove who created it." That's when Maria surprised them all. "I know who. I saw him 2 days ago at the Gentry house, practicing Mr. Gentry's writing. One of those security men, the one with the scarred hand. He had many papers, practicing over and over. It was something, but they needed more. They needed a confession, or at least evidence linking the forger to Whitfield." "I might be able to help with that," a new voice said. Everyone spun to see Captain Harrison emerging from the darkness, in civilian clothes rather than his uniform. "Captain," Caleb said, relieved. "How did you find us?" "Joseph sent word, and I'm glad he did because things are moving fast in town. Whitfield is pushing to have you declared an outlaw, shot on sight, but I've been doing some investigating of my own." He produced a telegram. "This is from a friend in Washington. Senator Whitfield recently received a payment of $50,000 from a company called Apex Holdings." Guess who owns Apex Holdings? Standard Oil, Lydia guessed. By way of about 6 shell companies, yes. But here's the interesting part. The man with the scarred hand, his name is James Thornton. He used to work for the Pinkertons, got discharged for fabricating evidence in a labor dispute, and he just deposited $5,000 in a Denver bank. "Payment for the forgery," Caleb said. "Most likely, but we need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it. And right now, Whitfield has the federal marshals in his pocket." "What about Judge Crawford?" Lydia asked. "Under house arrest," Harrison said grimly. "Whitfield claimed he was part of the conspiracy." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. They were running out of allies and options. "There is another way," Joseph said quietly. "The territorial governor. He has no love for Standard Oil. They've been trying to push through a pipeline that would cross reservation land. If we could get evidence to him." "Helena is 3 days' ride in good weather," Caleb pointed out. "In this snow, maybe 5. "Then you'd better get started," Harrison said. "I'll do what I can to slow things down in town, but Whitfield is moving to seize all the oil rights, not just yours. He's claiming the entire field is under federal jurisdiction due to proximity to reservation lands. That affects your people too," Lydia said to Joseph. The Crow warrior nodded grimly. "Which is why we'll help you get to Helena. My warriors know trails the white men don't." They prepared quickly. Caleb and Lydia would ride to Helena with 2 of Joseph's warriors as guides, carrying the evidence that could expose Whitfield's corruption misses. Chen and Miguel would stay with the Crow band, while Harrison returned to town to maintain what order he could. As they prepared to leave, Lydia pulled Caleb aside. "If we're caught, they'll hang you for sure." "Maybe you should go alone. We're partners," he interrupted. "In everything. That doesn't change because things got dangerous." She kissed him, quick and fierce. "Then let's ride, partner." They set out into the snowy darkness, following trails that were barely visible even to the Crow guides. The cold was bitter, cutting through even their heavy coats, and the horses struggled through drifts that sometimes reached their bellies. By dawn, they'd covered maybe 15 miles. Good progress given the conditions, but still with so far to go. They stopped to rest the horses in a sheltered grove, sharing what little food they'd brought. "Look," one of the warriors said suddenly, pointing back the way they'd come. In the distance, they could see riders following their trail, at least a dozen, moving fast despite the snow. Whitfield's men, Caleb said. They're better trackers than I thought. Or someone betrayed us, Lydia said quietly. They pushed on, but their pursuers were gaining. The Crow warriors led them higher into the mountains, where the trails were more treacherous but harder to follow. Still, by the second night, the pursuit was close enough that they could see their campfires. We need to split up, Caleb decided. I'll lead them off. No, Lydia said firmly. We stay together. Lydia? No, Caleb. Every time we've separated, things have gone wrong. We're stronger together. One of the Crow warriors spoke up. There is another way. Sacred caves, 2 miles from here, many passages, easy to lose pursuers, but what? They're sacred to our people, to enter without permission. Would your chiefs grant permission to save innocent lives? Lydia asked. The warrior considered, then nodded slowly. For friends of Joseph Black Elk, perhaps. They reached the caves just as their pursuers crested the ridge behind them. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for the horses, but it opened into a vast network of passages. The Crow warriors led them deep into the mountain, through passages that twisted and turned, past ancient paintings on the walls and chambers that echoed with the sound of underground water. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers entering the caves, shouts echoing in the darkness. This way, one of the warriors whispered, leading them through a passage so narrow they had to proceed single file. They emerged on the other side of the mountain, where fresh horses were waiting. Joseph had thought ahead, stationing relay mounts along possible escape routes. Go, the warrior said. We'll seal the passage behind you. Delay them further. Caleb wanted to protest, but there was no time. They mounted the fresh horses and rode hard through the night, pushing toward Helena with everything they had. By the morning of the third day, exhausted and half frozen, they could see the territorial capital in the distance. But as they approached, they saw something that made their hearts sink. Federal marshals at the city limits, checking everyone who entered. Whitfield telegraphed ahead, Lydia said. He knew where we'd go. They pulled back, hiding in a grove of trees to think. They were so close, but the final mile might be impossible. There's a back way, Caleb said suddenly. Through the Chinese quarter. Mrs. Chen has family there. They might help. It was a risk, but they had no choice. They circled the city, approaching from the east where the Chinese laundries and shops clustered. The area was less patrolled. Most lawmen ignored it unless there was trouble. They found the address Mrs. Chen had given them, a small laundry run by her cousin. The old man took one look at them and understood. Mrs. Chen sent word, he said in broken English. You need to reach Governor? Yes, Caleb said. It's urgent. The old man nodded. I help. But dangerous. He hid them in a delivery wagon, covering them with bags of laundry. The ride through the city was tense, stopping twice for inspections, but the marshals barely glanced at a Chinese laundry wagon. They reached the governor's mansion just as Senator Whitfield's carriage was pulling up. The senator had come himself, probably to make sure they didn't succeed. Back door, the laundryman whispered. Servant's entrance. They slipped in through the kitchen, startling the staff but finding an unexpected ally in the head housekeeper, who'd heard about their plight. The governor's in his study, she said, but Senator Whitfield just demanded an audience. Then we need to get there first, Caleb said. They rushed through the mansion's halls, reaching the study just as Whitfield was being announced. Governor Samuel Hauser, a silver-haired man with shrewd eyes, looked up in surprise as Caleb and Lydia burst in. Governor, we need your help, Lydia said quickly, before anyone could stop them. These are fugitives, Whitfield said, entering behind them. Arrest them immediately. On what charges? The governor asked calmly. Conspiracy, fraud, murder? All false charges, Caleb interrupted, producing the evidence they'd carried so far. And we can prove it. For the next hour, they laid out everything, the forged journal, Maria's testimony, the financial connections between Whitfield and Standard Oil, the attempt to steal not just their oil rights, but those of the entire region. Governor Hauser examined each piece of evidence carefully, while Whitfield grew increasingly agitated. This is ridiculous, the senator finally exploded. These are fabrications. Then you won't mind if I telegraph Washington for confirmation? The governor asked mildly. I'm sure the Attorney General would be interested in these allegations of corruption. Whitfield's face went pale. You're making a serious mistake, Governor. I have powerful friends. As do I, Senator, and mine aren't bought with Standard Oil money. The governor turned to his secretary. Send telegrams to the Attorney General, the Secretary of the Interior, and the Washington Post. Tell them we have evidence of attempted fraud involving federal oil rights. You can't, Whitfield started. I can, and I will. And Senator, I suggest you leave my state immediately. If you're still here tomorrow, I'll have you arrested for conspiracy. Whitfield looked like he might have a stroke. This isn't over, he snarled at Caleb and Lydia. You've made enemies you can't imagine? Maybe, Caleb said, but we've also made friends. And in the end, that matters more. After Whitfield stormed out, Governor Hauser smiled. You two have caused quite a stir. The whole territory's watching what happens in Silver Creek. We just wanted to keep what was ours, Lydia said, and in doing so, you've exposed corruption that goes all the way to Washington. I'll make sure your oil agreement is honored, and I'll send state marshals to maintain order until this is sorted out. What about the federal charges against us? Caleb asked. What charges? I don't see any legitimate charges, just a lot of hot air from a corrupt senator who's about to have much bigger problems than you two. Relief washed over them. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd exposed the conspiracy and saved their land. There is one thing, the governor added with a smile. I heard there's supposed to be a wedding soon. Given all the trouble you've been through, I'd be honored to perform the ceremony myself. If you're willing. Lydia looked at Caleb, her eyes shining. What do you think, Sheriff? Ready to make this partnership official? More than ready, he said, taking her hand. 3 days later, in the governor's mansion with Captain Harrison, Joseph Black Elk, Mrs. Chen, and their other allies as witnesses, Caleb Mercer and Lydia Harrow were married. It wasn't the wedding they'd originally planned, but it was perfect in its own way, a testament to the bonds they'd forged through adversity. As they exchanged vows, snow began to fall outside, blanketing Helena in pristine white. But inside, warmed by friendship and love, the future seemed bright with possibility. You may kiss the bride, Governor Hauser announced. Caleb did thoroughly, while their friends cheered. When they finally pulled apart, Lydia was laughing through tears of joy. So, Mrs. Mercer, Caleb said, ready to go home and build that future we talked about? With you? She replied. I'm ready for anything. They returned to Silver Creek as heroes, the town turning out to welcome them despite the snow. The federal marshals were gone, replaced by state lawmen who actually upheld justice. The oil development proceeded as planned, with profits flowing not to eastern robber barons but to the local community. But there were reminders that their fight had made lasting enemies. A week after their return, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a single black chess piece, a king, and a note. The game isn't over. Caleb showed it to Lydia, who was going through architectural plans for the new school they were building. Let them come, she said calmly. We faced worse and survived. He put his arms around her, looking out the window at their land, their empire built not on greed but on courage, loyalty, and love. Together? He asked. Always together, she confirmed. As winter deepened around Silver Creek, transforming the landscape into something magical and austere, Caleb and Lydia began the real work of building their future. The oil derricks would come soon, the prosperity they'd fought for would flow, but for now, in the quiet of a snowy afternoon with the woman he loved beside him, Caleb knew they'd already won the only battle that truly mattered. They'd won their freedom, their right to choose their own path, and most importantly, they'd won it together. The black chess piece sat on Caleb's desk for weeks, a silent reminder that their enemies hadn't forgotten them. But as Christmas approached and Silver Creek bustled with newfound prosperity, it seemed almost possible to believe the threat was empty. The first oil well had been successfully drilled, bringing in more money in a month than the ranch had seen in years. The school foundation was laid, and construction would begin as soon as the spring thaw came. Everything they'd fought for was finally coming to fruition. It was Lydia who first noticed something was wrong. She'd taken to managing the financial books for both the ranch and the oil operation, her Eastern education serving them well in navigating the complex world of contracts and investments. One evening in early December, she looked up from the ledgers with a frown. "Caleb, we're missing money." He set down the harness he'd been mending and came to look over her shoulder. "How much?" "Nearly $10,000. It's been bleeding out slowly, hidden in supply costs and phantom workers on the payroll. Someone's been stealing from us, and they've been clever about it." Caleb's jaw tightened. After everything they'd been through, to be betrayed from within was almost worse than facing external enemies. Who has access to the accounts? Too many people. The foreman, the oil company representatives, anyone in the sheriff's office who handles the municipal funds. She paused, her face paling. "Oh God, Caleb. What if it's one of our own people?" The thought was sickening, but they had to investigate. Over the next few days, they quietly audited every transaction, traced every payment. The trail led to an unexpected place. Tom Brennan, one of Caleb's most trusted deputies, the man who'd stood by him during the fight against Gentry and Whitfield. "I can't believe it," Caleb said, staring at the evidence. Payments to accounts in Brennan's name, supplies ordered from companies that didn't exist except on paper, all authorized with the deputy's signature. "We have to confront him," Lydia said, though she looked as sick as Caleb felt. They found Brennan at the sheriff's office, working late as he often did. When Caleb laid out the evidence, the deputy's face went through a range of emotions: surprise, fear, and finally, desperate resignation. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Brennan said, slumping in his chair. "They said it was just information at first, nothing harmful. Just keep them informed about your plans, your movements." "Who?" Caleb demanded. "Who's behind this?" "I don't know their names. They contacted me after Whitfield left, said they represented interests that wanted to monitor the situation. They had information about my sister in Denver. She got into trouble, owes money to dangerous people. They said they'd hurt her if I didn't cooperate." Lydia leaned forward. "So you betrayed us to protect your sister?" "I thought I could control it, keep the damage minimal. But then they wanted more. Access to accounts, inside information about the oil operations. They said if I helped them, they'd clear my sister's debts and leave us alone." "And you believed them?" Caleb's voice was hard. "What choice did I have?" Brennan's voice cracked. "You don't have family, Caleb. You don't understand what you'd do to protect them." The words stung because they held truth. Until Lydia, Caleb had never had anyone he'd sacrifice everything to protect. Now, looking at his wife, he understood Brennan's desperation even as he condemned his choices. "Where's your sister now?" Lydia asked, her tone softer than Caleb's. "I don't know. I haven't heard from her in weeks. I think they might have already hurt her." Caleb made a decision that would have seemed impossible moments before. "We're going to find her. But Tom, you're going to help us catch whoever's behind this. They'll kill me. They'll kill you anyway once you're no longer useful. This is your only chance at redemption." Over the next week, they played a dangerous game. Brennan continued to feed information to his handlers, but now it was information Caleb and Lydia wanted them to have. False trails, misleading data about oil production, fabricated weaknesses in their security. Meanwhile, Lydia used her connections from her Eastern education, telegraphing classmates who'd married into Denver society, tracking down information about Brennan's sister. What she found was disturbing. Sarah Brennan had indeed been in debt to criminal elements, but she'd been killed 3 weeks ago. The people controlling Tom had been using a dead woman as leverage. When they told Brennan, something broke in the man. "They killed her? She's been dead this whole time?" "I'm sorry, Tom," Lydia said gently. The deputy's grief transformed into rage. "I'll help you destroy them." Every last one. The trap was set for December 20th. Brennan had convinced his handlers that Caleb and Lydia would be traveling to Helena for Christmas, leaving the oil operations vulnerable. In reality, they'd be waiting with Captain Harrison's cavalry and state marshals Governor Hauser had sent. The night was moonless and cold, with fresh snow muffling all sound. Caleb positioned himself in the oil field office, while Lydia waited in the main house with Mrs. Chen and several armed men. They didn't know exactly what form the attack would take, but they were ready for anything. Or so they thought. The attack came from an unexpected direction, through the law itself. A federal judge arrived with a squad of marshals, carrying papers that froze all their assets pending investigation of tax irregularities. It was all legal, all properly documented, and completely fabricated. "This is impossible," Lydia said, reading through the papers. "These tax assessments are for amounts we never earned, properties we don't own." The judge, a thin man named Cornelius Ashworth, Victoria Ashford's brother, they later learned, smiled coldly. "That's for the courts to determine. In the meantime, all operations cease. All accounts are frozen." "You can't do this," Caleb protested. "I'm a federal judge. I can do whatever the law allows. And the law, Sheriff Mercer, is subject to interpretation." They were being destroyed through legal manipulation, a tactic they couldn't fight with guns or courage. But Lydia had learned from their previous battles. She'd prepared for this possibility. "Judge Ashworth," she said calmly, "before you proceed, you should know that we've been in communication with President Cleveland's administration. They're very interested in the oil situation here, particularly in ensuring that Montana's resources benefit Montanans." It was a partial bluff. They'd sent letters but received no response. But the judge didn't know that. "Furthermore," she continued, "we've arranged for several journalists to observe tonight's proceedings. I believe they're particularly interested in your family connections to certain oil speculators." On cue, 3 men emerged from the shadows, reporters from major Eastern papers who'd been investigating corruption in Western resource extraction. Caleb had telegraphed them weeks ago, offering exclusive access to their story. Judge Ashworth's composure cracked slightly. "This is interference with federal proceedings. This is transparency," one of the reporters interrupted. "Judge, would you care to comment on your sister Victoria's recent indictment for conspiracy to defraud?" The judge went pale. Apparently he hadn't heard about his sister's legal troubles that Governor Hauser had helped arrange after their last confrontation. "This matter requires further review," Ashworth said quickly. "We'll postpone enforcement pending clarification from Washington." He left hastily with his marshals, but everyone knew he'd be back in some form. The chess game continued, each move bringing new dangers. That night, as they debriefed in their home, surrounded by allies and friends, a telegram arrived that changed everything. It was from President Cleveland himself, brief and to the point. "Federal investigation launched into oil rights corruption. Maintain status quo. Federal protection authorized. Trust no one." Cleveland. "The President himself," Lydia breathed. "How?" Captain Harrison smiled grimly. "I may have understated my connections in Washington. The President owes me a favor from the war. I called it in, but even presidential attention couldn't stop what happened next. On Christmas Eve, as the town gathered for church services, fire broke out simultaneously in 3 places: the oil derrick, the sheriff's office, and the new school construction site. Caleb and the townspeople fought the flames desperately, managing to save the oil derrick and most of the sheriff's office. But the school was lost. Months of work reduced to ashes. In the chaos, no one noticed the riders approaching from the east until it was too late. 20 men, all wearing badges declaring them federal agents, rode into town. At their head was someone Caleb had hoped never to see again: Victoria Ashford herself, apparently free on bail and more dangerous than ever. "Sheriff Mercer," she called out over the sound of the fire bells, "I have warrants for your arrest and your wife's, tax evasion, fraud, and now arson, burning your own buildings for insurance money." "That's insane," Caleb said. "We didn't start these fires." "No." "Then who did? Your deputy Tom Brennan says otherwise." Caleb turned to see Brennan standing with Victoria's men, unable to meet his eyes. The betrayal was complete. Brennan had been playing all sides, probably promised enough money to disappear forever. "Tom," Lydia said quietly, "your sister died trying to protect you. Is this how you honor her memory?" Something flickered in Brennan's eyes. Shame, regret, maybe even a hint of the man he used to be. But it wasn't enough. "I'm sorry," he said, "but she's dead because of choices I made trying to help you. I've got nothing left to lose." "You've got your soul," Mrs. Chen said, stepping forward. The elderly woman looked frail next to the armed men, but her voice carried surprising authority. "I know about loss, Mr. Brennan. Lost everything in China, came here with nothing. But I never lost myself." Her words seemed to affect Brennan, but Victoria was impatient. "Enough. Arrest them." As the federal agents moved forward, Joseph Black Elk and his warriors appeared, forming a protective circle around Caleb and Lydia. "These are friends of the Crow Nation," Joseph announced. "To take them, you must go through us." "You're interfering with federal authority," Victoria warned. "I can have you all arrested." "Try it," Joseph said simply. The tension was electric, 24 guns pointed at each other, the burning buildings casting everything in hellish orange light. Then another voice cut through the standoff. "Everyone stand down!" A man in an expensive suit stepped out of the shadows, someone none of them recognized but who carried himself with unmistakable authority. He produced credentials that made Victoria step back. "Robert Sterling, Department of Justice, Special Prosecutor's Office. I'm taking control of this situation under direct presidential authority." Victoria started to protest, but Sterling cut her off. "Mrs. Ashford, you're under arrest for falsifying federal documents, impersonating federal agents, and conspiracy to commit fraud. These men with you aren't federal agents. They're Pinkerton detectives hired under false pretenses." The reversal was so sudden that for a moment no one moved. Then Victoria laughed, a bitter sound. "You think you've won? You have no idea who you're really fighting. The people behind this own judges, senators, even cabinet members. You're insects challenging giants." "Perhaps," Sterling admitted, "but insects can bring down giants if there are enough of them." He gestured, and real federal marshals emerged from strategic positions around the town. They'd been there all along, waiting. As Victoria and her fake agents were arrested, Sterling approached Caleb and Lydia. "The president sends his regards. He's been watching this situation closely, using it to identify and root out corruption in the federal system. You've been bait, I'm afraid." "Bait?" Lydia's voice was dangerously calm. "People have died. Our town has been terrorized, and we were bait?" "Necessary casualties in a larger war," Sterling said, though he had the grace to look uncomfortable. "But the president wants to make it right. Full federal protection, guaranteed development rights, and compensation for all damages." "And Brennan?" Caleb asked, looking at his former deputy, who stood apart, seeming lost. "That's up to you. He's committed crimes, but he's also a victim. Your testimony will determine his fate." Caleb looked at Lydia, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. Justice demanded punishment, but mercy recognized a broken man who'd lost everything. "He goes free," Caleb said finally, "but he leaves Montana and never comes back." Brennan's eyes filled with tears. "Caleb, Just go, Tom. Go and try to find whatever peace you can." As Brennan walked away into the snowy night, Caleb felt a chapter closing. But the story was far from over. The next months brought rapid changes. With federal protection firmly in place, the oil development proceeded smoothly. The school was rebuilt, larger and better than before. Silver Creek transformed from a frontier town to a thriving small city, with paved streets, electric lights, and all the modern conveniences prosperity could buy. But prosperity brought its own challenges. The indigenous peoples who'd been promised a share of the wealth found themselves marginalized by newcomers who didn't honor the old agreements. Environmental damage from the drilling began to affect water supplies, and the social fabric of the town stretched and sometimes tore under the pressure of rapid change. Caleb found himself mediating between old-timers and newcomers, between those who wanted unlimited development and those who wanted to preserve something of the old ways. It was exhausting, often thankless work. One evening in March, as he sat in his sheriff's office dealing with yet another dispute between oil workers and ranchers, Lydia entered with a strange expression on her face. "What is it?" he asked, immediately alert. She handed him a letter. "It's from my Aunt Margaret." Caleb tensed. They hadn't heard from her since she'd tried to force Lydia back to Boston. "What does she want?" "She's dying," Lydia said quietly. "Cancer. She wants to see me before the end." The request put them in a difficult position. Margaret had been their enemy, but she was also Lydia's only remaining family. "You should go," Caleb said, though the thought of Lydia traveling to Boston into potential danger made him anxious. "Come with me," she said. "The town can spare you for a few weeks, and I want her to see what we've built together, who you really are." They made the journey by train, a luxury the oil money now afforded. The contrast between the Montana frontier and Boston society was stark. Lydia navigated it gracefully, but Caleb felt out of place in the elegant drawing rooms and exclusive clubs. Margaret received them in her Beacon Hill mansion, looking frail but still formidable. "So," she said, studying Caleb, "you're the man who stole my niece." "I'm the man who loves your niece," Caleb corrected calmly. Margaret was quiet for a moment, then surprised them both by smiling. "Good answer." She turned to Lydia. "I was wrong about him. About everything, really. I spent my whole life following rules, maintaining propriety, and what do I have to show for it? An empty house and a fortune that won't follow me to the grave." She gestured to a stack of documents on the side table. "I've changed my will. The inheritance I tried to use to control you. It's yours unconditionally. Use it to build that life you talked about." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "Aunt Margaret!" "Don't get sentimental on me now, child. I'm trying to do one right thing before I die. Don't make it harder than it needs to be." They stayed in Boston for 2 weeks, and in that time, Caleb saw a different side of Margaret. A woman who'd been trapped by expectations just as surely as Lydia had been, but who'd never found the courage to break free. She died on their last night there, holding Lydia's hand, and surprisingly, Caleb's too. "Take care of her," were her last words to him. "Always," he promised. The inheritance was substantial, nearly $500,000. Combined with the oil revenues, it made them wealthy beyond their dreams. But on the train ride home, neither of them talked about the money. "She was so alone," Lydia said quietly, watching the landscape roll by. "All that money, all that status, and she died alone except for us." "That won't be us," Caleb said firmly. "We've got family, maybe not blood, but chosen family. Mrs. Chen, Joseph, Captain Harrison, the whole town, really." Lydia smiled and leaned against him. "You're right. We're rich in ways that matter more than money. But money, they soon learned, brought obligations. Word of their wealth spread, and suddenly everyone had a cause, a charity, a desperate need. Some were legitimate. They funded a hospital, supported widows and orphans, established a fund for injured oil workers. But others were simply trying to take advantage. One morning in May, Caleb arrived at his office to find a well-dressed black man waiting for him. "Sheriff Mercer?" "My name is Elijah Freeman. I represent a group of freed slaves who want to establish a community here in Montana. We heard about what you've done for the Crow Nation, how you've shared the wealth fairly. We're hoping you might help us too." It was an unexpected request, but not an unwelcome one. Caleb had seen how the oil boom was attracting all kinds of people seeking opportunity. Why shouldn't former slaves have the same chance? "What kind of help are you looking for?" he asked. "Land to start, fair prices not inflated because of our color, jobs in the oil fields for those who want them, protection from those who'd rather we stayed in the South where they think we belong." Caleb considered. It would be controversial. Many in the town wouldn't welcome black settlers. But then again, they'd already faced controversy and survived. "I'll need to discuss it with my wife and the town council," he said. "But Mr. Freeman, if your people are willing to work hard and follow the law, I don't see why you shouldn't have the same opportunities as anyone else." Freeman's face showed surprise, then cautious hope. "You mean that?" "I've learned that a man should be judged by his actions, not his appearance. Come to the town meeting tomorrow night. Present your case. I'll support you." The town meeting was contentious, with voices raised on both sides. But Lydia's eloquent argument about the American promise of opportunity for all, combined with Joseph Black Elk's powerful statement about knowing what it meant to be excluded, swayed enough people. The Freeman community was welcomed, though not without grumbling from some quarters. As summer arrived, Silver Creek had become something unique in the Montana Territory. A diverse, prosperous community where Crow warriors worked alongside former slaves in the oil fields, where Chinese merchants operated next to European immigrant shops, where the American dream was actually achievable for those willing to work for it. But the forces that had tried to destroy them hadn't given up. On the 4th of July, as the town celebrated with fireworks and festivities, a new threat arrived in the form of a congressional investigation committee, led by a senator even more powerful than Whitfield had been. Senator James Thornton, no relation to the forger, despite the shared name, was known as Standard Oil's senator, completely owned by Rockefeller's empire. He arrived with a mandate to investigate irregularities in the Silver Creek oil development, with the power to shut everything down if he found cause. "We meet again, Sheriff Mercer," Thornton said when Caleb greeted him at the train station. They'd never met before, but Caleb understood. He was facing the same forces, just with a different face. "Senator," Caleb replied coolly, "I trust your investigation will be thorough and fair." Thornton smiled, a predator's expression. "Oh, it will be thorough. As for fair, well, that depends on your definition." The investigation was a farce, predetermined in its outcome. Thornton's team found violations everywhere. Safety infractions that didn't exist, financial irregularities in perfectly legal transactions, environmental damage that was actually from natural causes. It was clear they intended to manufacture enough violations to justify federal seizure of the oil fields. But Caleb and Lydia had learned from their previous battles. They'd kept meticulous records, had everything witnessed and notarized. More importantly, they'd made friends in high places, including some of Rockefeller's competitors who were happy to help thwart Standard Oil's expansion. The showdown came at a public hearing in the town hall. Thornton presented his fabricated evidence, expecting easy victory. But Caleb and Lydia were ready with their defense, not just documents and testimony, but something more powerful. One by one, members of the community stood to speak. Joseph Black Elk talked about how the oil revenues had helped his people survive and prosper. Elijah Freeman described how Silver Creek had given his community a chance at a new life. Mrs. Chen, in her broken but passionate English, told how Caleb and Lydia had risked everything to keep the wealth in local hands, rather than let it flow to Eastern oligarchs. The journalists were there too, the same ones who'd covered the earlier conflicts. But this time, there were more. Reporters from across the country, drawn by the story of a small town standing up to one of the most powerful corporations in America. Thornton tried to maintain control, but the narrative was slipping away from him. When he attempted to dismiss the community testimony as irrelevant, Lydia stood and delivered perhaps the most important speech of her life. "Senator Thornton," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed hall, "you come here representing interests that have already extracted billions from American soil, leaving behind poverty and devastation. You look at our prosperity and see only opportunity for more exploitation. But what you don't understand is that Silver Creek is no longer just a town. It's a symbol. We've proven that resource wealth can benefit ordinary people, not just robber barons. We've shown that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. We've demonstrated that courage and community can stand against corruption and greed." She paused, looking directly at the journalists. "The question before us isn't just about Silver Creek's oil. It's about what kind of country America wants to be. Do we exist to enrich a few powerful men, or do we believe in opportunity for all? Do we allow might to make right, or do we stand for justice even when it's costly?" The crowd erupted in applause, and Thornton knew he'd lost the public relations battle, but he still had legal power, and he was prepared to use it. "Eloquent words, Mrs. Mercer," he said when the applause died down. "But the law is the law. And I find sufficient violations to recommend federal seizure." That's when Robert Sterling, the special prosecutor who'd helped them before, stood up. "Actually, Senator, you don't have that authority. I've been conducting my own investigation into you." He produced a sheaf of documents. "These are records of payments from Standard Oil to your campaign, funneled through shell companies. This is testimony from your staff about orders to falsify evidence. And this," he held up a letter, "is your correspondence with John D. Rockefeller himself, promising to deliver Silver Creek's oil fields in exchange for a seat on Standard Oil's board after you leave the Senate." Thornton went pale. "Those are private documents. You had no right. They were provided by a whistleblower in your own office, Senator, someone who believes in the oath they took to serve the people, not Standard Oil." The revelation destroyed Thornton. Within days, he'd resigned from the Senate and fled to Europe. Standard Oil, facing public backlash and potential antitrust action, officially withdrew all interest in Silver Creek's oil. They'd won. Definitively, finally won, or so they thought. The victory celebration lasted well into the night, with the entire town gathering to commemorate not just their triumph, but their transformation from a frontier outpost to a beacon of progressive prosperity. But as Caleb and Lydia finally made their way home in the early hours of the morning, they found an envelope slipped under their door. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper with a brief message. Congratulations on your victory. But empires aren't built on oil alone. They're built on blood. And that's a price you haven't paid yet. Soon. A friend. Caleb crumpled the letter, but Lydia took it from him, smoothing it out. We should keep this. Evidence. Evidence of what? Another threat from another enemy we haven't identified? She touched his face gently. Evidence that we're making a difference. They wouldn't threaten us if we weren't a threat to them. He pulled her close, feeling the exhaustion of months of conflict. When does it end, Lydia? When do we get to just live? Maybe never, she admitted. Maybe the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. But Caleb, look what we've built. Look what we've protected. Isn't it worth it? He thought about Silver Creek, transformed from a dying frontier town to a thriving, diverse community. He thought about the Crow children attending the new school, the freed slaves working their own farms, the Chinese merchants operating businesses without fear of violence. He thought about the oil wealth flowing into hospitals and schools instead of Manhattan mansions. Yes, he said simply. It's worth it. But the letter's promise of blood proved prophetic. 3 days later, as Caleb made his morning rounds, shots rang out. He felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, the same one Gentry had wounded what seemed like a lifetime ago, and fell from his horse. As consciousness faded, he saw faces surrounding him. Lydia's terrified, Joseph's grim, Mrs. Chen's determined. He tried to speak, to reassure them, but darkness claimed him. He woke 3 days later in the new hospital their oil money had built. Lydia was beside his bed, haggard but smiling through tears. You're back, she whispered. Thank God you're back. What happened? His voice was rough, throat dry. A sniper, professional, from the trajectory and distance. He escaped, but not before Joseph's warriors tracked him to a camp 10 miles out. There were plans there, Caleb, plans to kill you, me, Joseph, everyone who's stood against them. Who's them? We still don't know for certain, but Sterling thinks it's a consortium of interests, Standard Oil, railroad barons, corrupt politicians, all united in stopping what we represent. Caleb tried to sit up, winced at the pain. We need to heal, Lydia interrupted firmly. You nearly died, Caleb. The bullet was an inch from your heart. He looked at her, seeing the strain of the past days etched on her face. I'm sorry for putting you through this. Don't you dare apologize for being who you are, she said fiercely. You're the man who stands up to bullies, who fights for justice, who risks everything for others. It's why I love you. But Caleb, we need to be smarter. We can't fight shadows forever. She was right. They'd been reactive, responding to threats as they came. It was time to go on the offensive. Recovery was slow and painful, but it gave Caleb time to think, to plan, to see patterns he'd been too busy fighting to notice before. As he lay in the hospital bed, Lydia brought him reports, telegrams, newspapers from across the country. Together, they began to piece together a larger picture that was both encouraging and terrifying. Look at this, Lydia said one afternoon, spreading out a map of the United States marked with red pins. Every place where communities have successfully resisted corporate takeover, where local resources have stayed in local hands. There are dozens of them, Caleb. We're not alone in this fight. He studied the map, noting the clusters around mining towns in Colorado, timber communities in Oregon, farming cooperatives in Kansas. They're all isolated, fighting separately. That's why the robber barons keep winning. They're organized and we're not. Then maybe it's time to change that, Lydia suggested, her eyes bright with possibility. What if we brought them together? Created a network of communities supporting each other? It was an ambitious idea, potentially game-changing, but from his hospital bed, Caleb could do little but plan. The actual work would have to wait until he recovered, and his enemies knew it. They pressed their advantage while he was weakened. The first sign of trouble came when Miguel rushed into the hospital room, his face grim. Boss, we've got problems at the ranch. Someone's poisoned half the herd, not enough to kill them, but enough to make them unsellable. And the oil workers are talking strike. They say they haven't been paid, but we sent the payroll out 3 days ago. The payroll was intercepted, Caleb said immediately, understanding the game. Check with the bank. I bet the funds never left our account. Someone's trying to turn our own people against us. He was right. Investigation revealed that the bank manager, a recent arrival in town, had been holding the funds on orders from federal auditors who didn't exist. The man disappeared that same night, leaving behind evidence of embezzlement that Caleb knew was planted to muddy the waters. But the damage was done. Trust, once broken, was hard to repair. Some of the oil workers, especially newer arrivals who didn't know Caleb and Lydia personally, began to grumble about exploitation, about rich owners no different from the robber barons back east. "We need to address this directly," Lydia said. "Call a town meeting, open the books, show everyone exactly where the money goes." The meeting was scheduled for Saturday night, but on Thursday another crisis struck. Joseph Black Elk arrived at the hospital with news that made Caleb try to get out of bed despite his injuries. Federal troops, Joseph said, 2 companies of cavalry, making camp just outside the reservation. They claim it's routine patrols, but my scouts say they're surveying the oil fields. Under whose orders? Lydia demanded. That's the strange part. The commanding officer says he's operating under sealed orders, to be opened only if certain conditions are met. It was psychological warfare, Caleb realized. The presence of federal troops created uncertainty, fear, the possibility that at any moment the government might intervene. It was designed to make them paranoid, reactive, prone to mistakes. "We ignore them," Caleb said finally. "Continue as normal. If they're legitimate, they'll reveal their purpose. If not, we'll expose them." But ignoring armed soldiers on their doorstep was easier said than done. The town grew tense, rumors flew, and the economic activity that had been booming began to slow as investors grew nervous. Then, unexpectedly, an ally emerged from an unlikely source. Tom Brennan, the deputy who'd betrayed them, returned to Silver Creek, but he wasn't alone. He brought with him a woman in her 40s, sharp-featured and intense. "Caleb," Brennan said, standing in the hospital doorway, unable to meet his eyes. "I know I have no right to be here, but Miss Stanton insisted." The woman stepped forward. Ida Stanton, investigative journalist for the New York Herald. "Mr. Brennan has been helping me investigate a conspiracy that goes all the way to Washington, a conspiracy you're at the center of, whether you know it or not." Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward where his gun would be, but Lydia stopped him. "Let's hear what she has to say." Stanton produced a thick folder of documents. "For the past 6 months, I've been tracking suspicious financial transactions, political appointments, and corporate maneuvers all centered around Western resource extraction. What I found is a coordinated effort by the nation's wealthiest men to monopolize not just oil, but water rights, mineral deposits, timber, everything of value west of the Mississippi." "We know about that," Lydia said. "We've been fighting it." "No, Mrs. Mercer, you've been fighting the symptoms. I'm talking about the disease itself. There's a group, they call themselves the Continental Club. Rockefeller's part of it, but he's not the leader. That honor goes to someone you haven't met yet, Augustus Crown." The name meant nothing to Caleb, but Lydia gasped. "Crown Industries, they own half the railroads in the country, and they want to own everything else," Stanton confirmed. "Your successful resistance here in Silver Creek has made you a symbol, a rallying point for others who want to fight back. That's why they need to destroy you. Not just defeat you, but destroy you so thoroughly that no one else will dare resist." "And you're telling us this why?" Caleb asked suspiciously. "Because I believe in the power of truth and a free press. And because Mr. Brennan convinced me you're the real thing, honest people fighting an honest fight." She glanced at Brennan, who still couldn't meet Caleb's eyes. "He's paid a heavy price for his mistakes, Sheriff. He's been helping me at great personal risk." "I don't want forgiveness," Brennan said quickly. I needed to do something right. My sister would have wanted that." Caleb studied his former deputy, seeing the hollow eyes, the trembling hands of a man living with unbearable guilt. "What kind of help are you offering?" Stanton answered, "Information. The Continental Club is meeting in San Francisco next month. All of them, including Crown himself. They're planning something they call the Western Solution, a final answer to the resistance movements. You have someone inside. I have documents stolen at great risk, but more importantly, I have a plan. If you're willing to take the greatest risk of your lives." She laid out her proposal. It was audacious, dangerous, and potentially suicidal, but it was also the first truly offensive move they could make against their enemies. "You want us to go to San Francisco," Lydia summarized, "infiltrate their meeting, and steal evidence of their conspiracy." "Not just steal it," Stanton corrected. "Expose it publicly, in front of the assembled press at the Pacific Commerce Exhibition. Crown and his associates will all be there, celebrating their power. Imagine their faces when their private conversations are suddenly played for hundreds of journalists." "Played?" Caleb asked. Stanton smiled. "There's a new invention, Edison's phonograph. I have a friend who's modified it to be more discreet. We could record their entire meeting without them knowing." It was an insane plan, but its audacity might be its strength. No one would expect them to go on the offensive so directly. "I can't go," Caleb said, gesturing to his injured shoulder. "I can barely ride a horse, let alone infiltrate a heavily guarded meeting." "I'll go," Lydia said immediately. "Absolutely not. Caleb, I'm the one with the Eastern education, the social training. I can blend in with that crowd in ways you never could, even healthy." She turned to Stanton. "What would I need to do?" As Stanton outlined the details, Caleb felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. They were sending his wife into the heart of enemy territory, alone and vulnerable. But he also knew she was right. She was the only one who could pull it off. The town meeting that Saturday went better than expected. Lydia's transparency about the finances, combined with testimonials from workers who'd been with them from the beginning, calmed most fears. But Caleb noticed federal soldiers in the crowd, watching, taking notes. Captain Harrison, who'd returned from his latest patrol, pulled Caleb aside afterward. "Those troops aren't regular army." "I checked. No unit deployments authorized for this area. They're mercenaries in federal uniforms. Can you prove it?" "Working on it. But Caleb, if they're planning something, it'll happen soon. They can't maintain the pretense much longer." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Lydia studied everything Stanton could tell her about the Continental Club members, their habits, their weaknesses. She practiced with the modified phonograph until she could operate it in complete darkness. Meanwhile, Caleb coordinated with their allies, preparing for whatever retaliation might come. The night before Lydia's departure for San Francisco, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over their land. The oil derricks stood like sentinels against the orange sky, symbols of both their success and the danger it brought. "I'm scared," Lydia admitted, leaning into his embrace. "So am I," Caleb said. "But fear's just wisdom in the face of danger. It'll keep you sharp, careful. If something happens to me, nothing will happen. You're too smart, too strong. You'll get what we need and come home." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with those green eyes that still made his heart race. "Promise me something. If I don't come back, don't let them win. Don't let our sacrifice be for nothing." "You're coming back," he said firmly. "But I promise, Silver Creek will stay free, no matter what." They made love that night with a desperate tenderness, both aware it might be their last time together. When dawn came, Lydia left with Stanton and, surprisingly, Brennan, who'd insisted on going as additional protection. "I know I failed you before," Brennan had said. "Let me try to make it right." Caleb had agreed, partly because he knew Brennan's guilt would make him vigilant, partly because Lydia needed all the help she could get. The days of Lydia's absence were agony. Caleb threw himself into work managing the ranch and oil operations, dealing with the continued presence of the fake federal troops, trying to maintain normalcy while his world felt like it was tilting off its axis. On the 4th day, a telegram arrived. Package secured. Returning soon. Love, L. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. That same evening, the fake federal troops made their move. They marched into town with a federal judge, a real one this time, carrying orders to arrest Caleb for sedition. "Sedition?" Caleb asked as they surrounded the sheriff's office. "Based on what?" "Based on your conspiracy with foreign agents to undermine American commerce," the judge replied. "We have evidence of your communications with European socialists, promises to share American resources with enemies of capitalism. It was absurd, but that didn't matter. They had official papers, federal authority, and 50 armed men. Caleb's deputies were outnumbered 10-1. "Stand down," Caleb told his men. "No one dies over false charges." As they put him in shackles, Joseph Black Elk and his warriors appeared, arrows nocked. "Let him go," Joseph commanded. "This is federal business, savage," the commander sneered. "Interfere and we'll destroy your entire tribe." Joseph's eyes found Caleb's, asking a silent question. Caleb shook his head slightly. Violence now would only give them excuse for massacre. "Smart choice," the commander said. "Take him to the train. We're transporting him to federal prison to await trial." But Caleb knew he'd never make it to any prison. This was an execution, dressed up in legal pretense. As they loaded him into a prison wagon, he saw Mrs. Chen in the crowd, her face calm but her eyes promising something. The wagon had barely left town when the explosion happened. Not the wagon, that would have been too obvious. Instead, the bridge ahead of them exploded in a shower of timber and flame. The horses reared, the wagon tilted, and in the chaos, smoke bombs exploded all around them. Through the smoke came Joseph's warriors, not killing but disabling, using clubs and rope to subdue the confused soldiers. Caleb felt his shackles being cut and looked up to see Miguel grinning at him. "Mrs. Chen's idea," Miguel explained. "She said if they want to play dirty, we should remind them we know how too." They escaped into the hills, but Caleb knew it was temporary. They'd just declared war on federal authority, even if that authority was fraudulent. There would be no going back now. "We need to get to San Francisco," Joseph said. "If your woman has proof of the conspiracy, that's the only thing that can save you now." They rode hard through the night, changing horses at stations where Joseph had allies. By dawn, they were 50 miles from Silver Creek, but pursuit was coming. Caleb could feel it like pressure in the air before a storm. The telegram waiting at the next station made his blood run cold. L compromised. Continental Club knows. Trap set. Do not come. Stanton. "It's a trap," Miguel said. "They know we'll come for her." "Of course it's a trap," Caleb said, checking his weapons. "But Lydia's walking into it alone." "We're going anyway." They reached San Francisco 2 days later, exhausted, dirty, but determined. The city was in festival mode for the Pacific Commerce Exhibition, streets packed with visitors from around the world. It was perfect cover, but also perfect chaos. They found Stanton at a safe house in Chinatown, her face grim. They grabbed Brennan yesterday, tortured him, got enough to know Lydia had the recordings. But she got away, hid somewhere in the city. The Continental Club has men searching everywhere. "Where would she go?" Caleb asked, trying to think like his wife. "Somewhere public," Joseph suggested. "Somewhere they couldn't just grab her without witnesses." "The exhibition," Caleb realized. "She's gone to the exhibition." That was the original plan. Expose them publicly. She's still trying to complete the mission. They raced toward the exhibition grounds, pushing through crowds of tourists and merchants. The main pavilion was hosting a gala that evening, where Augustus Crown himself would speak about the future of American commerce. They found Lydia at the telegraph office near the main entrance, surrounded by 3 rough-looking men who were clearly trying to convince her to come with them quietly. She saw Caleb and smiled, that fearless smile that had first captured his heart. "Gentlemen," she said loudly, drawing attention from passers-by. "My husband is here. Perhaps you'd like to explain to him why you're harassing me?" The men turned, saw Caleb and his companions, and reached for their weapons. But Joseph was faster, his knife flying true, disarming the nearest man. The crowd screamed and scattered as a fight erupted. In the chaos, Lydia ran to Caleb, pressing something into his hand. A small cylinder, the phonograph recording. "It's all here," she gasped. Crown admitting to murder, bribery, conspiracy, everything. "We need to get to the main stage," Stanton shouted, appearing with several journalists she'd apparently recruited. "If we can play this during Crown's speech..." They fought their way through the exhibition, Continental Club thugs appearing from everywhere. Caleb's shoulder screamed with pain from his recent injury, but adrenaline kept him moving. They burst into the main pavilion just as Augustus Crown was taking the stage. Crown was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to absolute power. He saw them and smiled, not the least bit concerned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "it appears we have some disruption. Security, please remove these people." But Stanton was already at the phonograph machine the exhibition had set up for demonstrations. She inserted the cylinder and cranked the handle. Crown's voice filled the pavilion, tinny but clear. The Western problem requires a permanent solution. Kill the leaders, blame the Indians or Chinese. The federal government will have no choice but to impose martial law, and we'll get development rights for the entire territory. The crowd gasped. Crown's face went from confident to horrified as his own words condemned him. The recording continued, laying out the entire conspiracy. Bribes to senators, plans to massacre settlers and blame indigenous peoples, strategies to monopolize every resource west of the Mississippi. "That's a fabrication!" Crown shouted, but the damage was done. Journalists were scribbling frantically, photographers capturing his panicked expression. Then the federal marshals arrived, real ones this time, led by Robert Sterling. "Augustus Crown, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and treason against the United States." As Crown was led away, he passed close to Caleb and Lydia. "You've won this battle," he hissed, "but the war isn't over. There are others, more powerful than me. They'll destroy everything you love." "Maybe," Caleb replied. "But today, you lost. And tomorrow, we'll be ready for whoever comes next." The arrests that followed were sweeping. Dozens of Continental Club members, corrupt politicians, and hired killers were rounded up. The scandal dominated newspapers for weeks, sparking congressional investigations and reform movements across the country. But the victory came at a cost. When they returned to Silver Creek, they found parts of the town burned, several people killed in retaliation attacks before news of Crown's arrest reached his hired thugs. Among the dead was Elijah Freeman, shot defending his family's farm. At Freeman's funeral, his widow approached Lydia. He said if anything happened to him, I should tell you something. He said the dream of freedom is worth dying for, but it's worth more to live for it. Don't let his death make you stop living. Stop fighting. The words resonated deeply. Over the following months, as trials proceeded and the conspiracy unraveled, Caleb and Lydia worked to rebuild not just Silver Creek, but the network of resistant communities Lydia had envisioned. They established the Western Communities Alliance, linking towns across the territory in mutual defense and support. Tom Brennan, who'd been tortured but survived, chose to stay in Silver Creek. Caleb gave him a job, not as a deputy, but as a teacher in the school, working with children orphaned by the violence. It was a chance at redemption he grabbed with both hands. "I'll never make up for what I did," Brennan said one day as they watched the children play. "But maybe I can help ensure the next generation doesn't make my mistakes." Mrs. Chen, now in her 70s but still fierce, established a clinic where she taught both Western and Eastern medicine. Joseph Black Elk's tribe prospered from their share of the oil revenues, building schools and businesses that made them economically independent. But the threats hadn't ended. Crown had been right. There were others, shadows behind shadows. Caleb received regular warnings, anonymous letters promising vengeance. He ignored most of them, but he never let his guard down completely. One evening in autumn, as the first snows began to dust the mountains, Lydia found Caleb standing by the window of their home, watching the horizon. "What are you thinking?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "About the cost," he admitted. "All the people who died so we could be free. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Come with me." She led him outside to where the new school was letting out. Children of all colors, white, black, Chinese, Native American, were playing together, their laughter carrying on the cold air. Their parents, former enemies united by shared struggle, talked and planned together. "That's what it was worth," Lydia said. "Not just our freedom, but theirs. Not just our future, but the future of everyone who comes after us." As they stood there, a rider approached, a young man with the eager look of a newspaper reporter. "Sheriff Mercer?" "Mrs. Mercer?" "I'm from the Chicago Tribune. We're doing a story about the Silver Creek miracle, about how you fought off the robber barons and won." "It wasn't a miracle," Caleb said. "It was hard work, sacrifice, and people standing together when it mattered most. But surely you must have some secret, some special quality that made you succeed where others failed." Lydia smiled. "We do have a secret. We never fought alone. Every battle we won because people chose to stand with us. The real miracle of Silver Creek isn't that we defeated powerful enemies. It's that we proved ordinary people, united in purpose, are more powerful than any robber baron or corrupt politician." The reporter scribbled notes eagerly. What's next for Silver Creek? Caleb and Lydia exchanged glances. They'd been discussing this for weeks. The oil would run out eventually, the boom would end. They needed to prepare for a sustainable future. Education, Caleb said. We're using the oil money to build the best schools in the territory. When the oil's gone, we'll have educated citizens who can build new industries, new opportunities. And justice, Lydia added. We're establishing a legal aid society to help other communities fight corporate exploitation. The Continental Club is broken, but the impulse to exploit and oppress isn't. Someone needs to stand guard. As the reporter left, Caleb and Lydia walked back to their house, hand in hand. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The oil derricks stood silhouetted against the light, but beyond them, the eternal mountains remained unchanged. Do you ever regret it? Lydia asked. The simple life you had before I brought all this trouble to your door? Caleb stopped, turning to face her. The only thing I regret is that it took Silas Gentry's evil to bring us together. Everything else, the fights, the danger, the loss, it was all worth it to build this life with you. She kissed him then, there in the street where anyone could see, not caring about propriety or judgment. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Mrs. Chen says she needs to talk to us, Lydia said. Something about her nephew arriving from California with news. They found Mrs. Chen in her clinic, tending to a young Chinese man who looked like he'd ridden hard for days. What is it? Caleb asked, immediately alert. Mrs. Chen's expression was grave. Big trouble in California. Chinese Exclusion Act passing Congress. They want to drive out all Chinese, take our businesses, our homes. The young man spoke rapidly in Mandarin, Mrs. Chen translating. He says vigilantes already attacking Chinese communities. Many fleeing. They need somewhere safe to go. Caleb and Lydia didn't hesitate. They can come here, Lydia said. Silver Creek has room for anyone willing to work and live in peace. It will bring trouble, Mrs. Chen warned. Those who hate Chinese won't like Silver Creek protecting them. Then they'll have to go through us, Caleb said firmly. We didn't fight off robber barons just to let racial hatred win. Over the next weeks, Chinese refugees began arriving in Silver Creek. The town expanded rapidly, new neighborhoods springing up, new businesses opening. Not everyone was happy. Some of the original settlers grumbled about foreign invasion, but the majority, remembering their own struggles, welcomed the newcomers. Among the refugees was a young woman named Mei Lin, a doctor trained in San Francisco. She and Mrs. Chen established a proper hospital, combining Eastern and Western medicine in ways that drew patients from hundreds of miles away. Silver Creek is becoming something special, Captain Harrison observed during one of his visits. He'd been promoted to major, but still made regular trips to check on his friends. You're not just a town anymore, you're a symbol of what America could be. Symbols make good targets, Caleb pointed out. True, but they also inspire others to stand up, to fight back. I've been to a dozen towns in the last month, and they all talk about Silver Creek, about how you proved it's possible to win. But winning, Caleb was learning, was an ongoing process, not a final destination. Each victory brought new challenges, new enemies, new complications. The Chinese Exclusion Act brought federal scrutiny. The success of the integrated schools drew criticism from segregationists. The prosperity from oil attracted criminals and opportunists. One night, as Caleb made his rounds, he found Tom Brennan sitting outside the school, a bottle of whiskey beside him, though still unopened. Tom? Caleb sat beside his former deputy. What's wrong? Today would have been Sarah's birthday, Brennan said quietly. My sister. She would have been 32. They sat in silence for a moment, then Brennan continued. I got a letter today. From the family of one of the men who died in the Crown conspiracy. They blame me for his death, say if I hadn't helped expose the plot, he'd still be alive. That's not on you, Tom. Those men made their choices. Did they? Or were they like me? Desperate, scared, making bad decisions because they didn't see another way. Brennan picked up the bottle, stared at it. How do you do it, Caleb? How do you carry the weight of all the lives affected by your choices? Caleb thought carefully before answering. I remember that not choosing is also a choice. Every day we don't fight injustice. It grows stronger. Every time we don't stand up for what's right, wrong wins by default. The weight you're feeling, that's the cost of consciousness, of caring. It's heavy, but the alternative is worse. Brennan nodded slowly, then stood, leaving the bottle unopened. Thank you, Caleb, for giving me another chance. Not many men would have. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, Tom. What matters is what you do with it. As Brennan walked away, Caleb reflected on how much had changed since that night in Gentry's barn. The scared, brutalized woman he'd rescued was now a force of nature, reshaping society through sheer will and intelligence. The simple ranch he'd built was now part of an oil empire funding progressive change across the territory. The quiet life he'd known was gone, replaced by something larger, more important, more dangerous. A shot rang out in the distance, followed by shouts. Caleb ran toward the sound, finding a crowd gathered around a fallen figure. It was one of the Chinese refugees, shot by a masked rider who was already disappearing into the darkness. As Dr. Mei Lin worked to save the man's life, Caleb organized pursuit parties. But he knew they wouldn't catch the shooter. This was a message, a warning that the fight was far from over. "Sheriff," someone called out, "telegram for you." Caleb read it, his face darkening. It was from Washington. The Continental Club members were being released on technicality. Crown himself would walk free within the week. He found Lydia at the hospital, helping Mei Lin with the wounded man. When he showed her the telegram, her face went pale, but her jaw set with determination. "Then we'll be ready for them," she said. "We've built something here they can't destroy with bullets or legal tricks. We've built community, hope, proof that their way isn't the only way." She was right, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The forces arrayed against them were vast, entrenched, patient. They could afford to lose battles because they had the resources to fight forever. But as he looked around the hospital, at Mrs. Chen teaching Mei Lin an ancient healing technique, at white and black nurses working side by side, at Joseph Black Elk's warriors standing guard alongside his deputies, he felt hope. They'd built something worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. The wounded man survived, and his story spread through the Chinese community, reinforcing that Silver Creek would protect them. More refugees arrived daily, and with them came skills, knowledge, culture that enriched the entire town. Winter settled over Silver Creek like a white blanket, muffling sound and creating a sense of peace that Caleb knew was temporary. In the spring, Crown would be free. In the spring, the real battle would begin. But tonight, as he walked home through the snow to where Lydia waited, as he passed the school where children of all races learned together, the church where different faiths worshipped in harmony, the main street where diverse businesses thrived, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They'd done more than survive. They'd created something new, something that challenged the very foundations of the old order. And whatever came next, that accomplishment could never be taken away.